Hey friends, welcome to 21st Century Saints Live, our podcast and live stream series for members and those who are affiliated with, adjacent to, or have an interest in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here in the United Kingdom and around the world. I'm your host, Jane Christie. This is
Alana.
That was like, well done. Alana Wilson-Bryce. What's today's date? Do we know?
25th of May, 2022.
In the chat, we also have our amazing angel, monitor, and moderator assistant for tonight, and incredible support. Sarah Elizabeth is in the chat. If you guys have the need of any support, direction, resources, Sarah Elizabeth is wonderful at keeping the chat going. And monitored. Now, if we do have any audio problems tonight, as you can see, we're having a party at Alana's house.
Aye, a party right enough.
Oh, the problems we're having this evening. Will we start off with group therapy?
Yes.
Let's start off with group therapy. Tell me about...
So, first of all, Alana does have her allergies back again, and I don't have the ability to mute myself because it's Jane's audio, so I may well deafen you all with my cough. And yes, there's some rats having a party in my house this evening. The council came out tonight to patch up the holes out the back step. They plastered over a hole and the blooming rats have burrowed through the wet plaster and have managed to access my home again. So I can hear them right now and I'm freaking out. So if you see me pulling faces, that's why.
And yeah, and we are having constant power outages in our home. So yeah, thank you for letting me invade as well as the rest of the little visitors that you've got. You ever seen Ratatouille?
I don't know.
Oh, we're going to
I've heard of it, but I don't know if I've watched it.
Yeah, it might be therapeutic at this point. It will either send you over or...
I don't think they could send me any more over the edge than I already am, to be fair.
So this week is crazy, and so we're trying to squish in to the one webcam. We're sharing the same microphone, and we've always said with us you get a nice dose of real life, and so we have that again tonight, of course. Yeah, you good?
I'm just not liking my clothes horse in the background. Can I move it?
We're doing the laundry as we podcast. This is how to rock the 21st century. Okay, tonight's episode, I think it's one of the ones that when we first started podcasting, we were like thinking about who would we really like to speak to, which conversations would we really like to have, and this one was right up there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You've been on our list since we first started podcasting.
So Alana has what I would describe as a love-hate relationship with this guest. She has told him on many occasions what she really thinks of him, which most of the time is a deep, resounding love, but is all. I don't know. You've changed his nappy.
Yes.
Yes. Change his nappy. He has also bossed you around a stage.
He also claims, allegedly, that I threw a knife at him when he was a child. Yes, allegedly.
So we really want to thank our wonderful guest, Benjamin Hunter, for agreeing to come on and talk with us. We're going to get Ben to say hi, but if you think you may be a little bit familiar with Ben's face, Ben has the most incredible Mormon bio, especially for someone who is like I have a son the same age as Ben. He's young and he's done so many incredible things. And I've got to sort of sit from the sidelines and watch and be his supporter and watch how his journey has played out. So Ben has sang solo in General Conference, features in LDS Living as one of the top 10 conference moments of all time. Ben has starred in the British and Nauvoo Pageants. has been part of writing, directing, has an incredible career, is a very talented singer, and has just an amazing story to tell. So Ben, do you want to say hey and introduce yourself to our audience?
Hello everyone, thank you for having me on. To the point of my Aunt Alana's knife throwing skills, I will say that there are those who can corroborate the story, so perhaps they can be lined up for guests in the future that may be able to back me up. Happy to be on here, happy to share my story. I just hope that this evening I can allow someone to be, how would you say that, reassured that no matter what their journey looks like, it's 100% okay and right for them. And there's no dictators in our own personal journeys, whether that's with faith, in our careers, or elsewhere in our lives. There are no dictators in our own journeys, and it's just fine no matter where you are. So that's what I'm hoping to share tonight through my crazy story. That's what I'm hoping to do.
It is crazy. First question, do you have a favourite aunt or uncle if you had to pick?
Well,
I told you we'd be asking hard questions tonight.
I don't think we'd open with them.
I'm not going to put you straight on the spot. If you had to pick.
I
Meobs. Your Aunt Laura says meobs.
I choose my favourites based on my own personal needs on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
After something, then that person will be my favourite.
Yeah. What? So Laura Fletcher in the chat is Ben's aunt, and obviously we have Ben's other aunt today. And so the main question for you two to think on tonight is, what have you done for Ben lately? Yeah. So just a game we're looking for. Let's just jump right in. Ben, I first met you when you would have been about 11 years old, I think. So my oldest, Kyle, converted just around about the same time as you guys were sort of had made your way into young men. So it's round about this same time. And I just see this glowing, constantly smiling young boy who is so polite. Tell me what, if you had been honestly speaking about your experience of church and life up until that point, tell me about you as a kid.
Well, up until 11 years old, it had a very, very good childhood, very untraumatic life so far, up to that point. Didn't want for anything. A really good life up until then. In terms of church, it was just your standard up through primary, although I did, my baptism was delayed through personal choice, which is interesting nowadays to reflect on. I believe it was through personal choice. My mum can probably correct me on that. But a very normal kind of Scotland-centric LDS upbringing through primary with the same recycled leaders, good familiarity with those in the ward, becoming very akin to the fact that although we're a ward, we're a family. We see the same people outside of church as we do inside church, and those people becoming close associates on all accounts. So a very, very normal upbringing in the church, a very, very good childhood. Something about our family is we have always been very, very close. We always spent a lot of time together. We were always at grandma's once a week for what was called family day at the time. And so, yeah, very good childhood, very healthy upbringing, great family to grow up in.
Which, now I'm assuming that as Kyle comes into the church, as I return to activity in the church, that everybody's having the same Mormon experience. And I don't think I say this all the time. We mention it because it comes up so often, increasingly often, how you've actually had a completely different, not even necessarily set of values, but you have a completely different programming. You've been trained to think in certain ways. So, for example, you're learning from primary age how to interact with your own body, that your body is sacred and things like that. That this would have been completely new. So I guess what I'm asking is, were you aware of any sort of shame-based teachings up until the point before you arrive in youth?
No, I don't think so. I think it was very much what I thought was normal. And probably to a certain extent, it was very much what I thought everyone believed in or outside of the church.
Yes.
But I would say to a certain extent, there was an element, even at the age of maybe 10 or 11, of this perhaps supremacy is a strong word for a child that age, but this feeling of in school in particular of, oh well, we're members of the church and there are other people in this school who are members of the church and we know better than everyone around us. Because you are taught that, not verbatim, but that's instilled in you from a young age, right? That this is the one true church on the earth, that all others are wrong. And you're taught as well that ultimately, in order to be the best person that you can be and to be the best human that you can be and the best child of God that you can be, then the place to be is the Mormon church, because that's where you learn to be exactly that. So in as much as I didn't consciously consider every day, I wouldn't say so as a young child, that there was a difference between me and others. I just kind of thought everyone was held to the same moral standards to a certain extent. And perhaps if we're looking at time periods and generations, there may have been what we considered higher moral standards back in those days, or things that were fundamentally good and fundamentally wrong. But I certainly had that instilled in me that perhaps I did know better, but it wasn't a thing, it wasn't at the forefront.
Yes.
But it was there.
I mean, I can see it looking in as an adult convert that yeah, you kids were, and it's not framed as a bad thing, but I mean, when you're taught what you're going to be and where you're going to go, when you're taught that you're preparing to receive the power of God, that is a heady mixture. In school, are you the good kid? Do you have any rebelliousness at all?
Not in primary school, not at all. I was a good kid.
Not in primary school, okay.
Definitely the good kid. And certainly, I think I did pride myself on being the good kid as well, knowing that my teachers liked me, knowing that Mrs. McGill, my head teacher, liked me and was very fond of her family in general. So yeah, definitely the golden child.
Well, one of the questions that I find really fascinating about Mormonism in Scotland, one of the questions I have for you is kind of relating to that. I can see coming in that there is this very strong church family in our ward, with active parents, active children, and plans to go on missions, that kind of thing. And you talk about family day for your whole family, which is multi-generational now. You guys are all living the dream. You guys are the Mormon dream. And there, I think in our ward, we're talking about maybe a couple of families, you maybe possibly another one or two. Other wards and stakes throughout Scotland reflect the same thing. You've got some well-established multi-generational families. And I think there is a real difference there, because you guys are looked at, one as a great example, the two as the great hope and expectation of the future of the church. What is it like to live in that, though? Do you feel any pressure to be good, or is it just, how does that evolve as you go into youth?
Well, in my experience, although I wasn't aware at the time of exactly what was going on, and this dynamic of wanting to be the crown jewel family of the stake or the ward, being the kind of poster family, the front cover of the ensign kind of family. You're not aware that of the principles and the basis of that, but you are aware that there's an element of people looking to you and compliments from people in the ward about, oh, you're such a strong family, and You know, they say there's strength in numbers, and there was 9 of us eventually. And so, such a strong family. You're the hope of the ward. You're the hope of this stake. You're the hope of the church in Scotland. In fact, I even remember discussions about the fact that there was a time where people were asked to emigrate by church leaders, supposedly, to America to gather with the saints. But then there was talk in my time of, but now we need to build Zion, you know, where we stand, and it's families like yours that are going to be the hope and the strength of Israel. And so you're very aware of it. And children tend to conform for the most part, I would say, anyway.
Yeah.
And so you conform to the fact that you're always trying to get one up on these other families within that dynamic, or at least if you're not trying to get one up on you on other people, you certainly just feel, well, yeah, look at us, we are a great family. Mum and dad organise all these amazing activities all the time. They basically are the social conveners of this Mormon social club. And, you know, we're always involved, and, well, we play instruments just like those Mormon families you see on TV and read about. And, you know, so you're conscious of it as a child, and you conform to it and you play into it. I would say that the turning point is when you come to youth and you begin to mature and you begin to have emotions, and you're developing a sense of emotional intelligence, that you begin to struggle with that dynamic and struggle with the pressure to live up to it, and to live up to the expectations that people have of you being the hope of Israel.
And I think that that's really the key for me, because obviously we are going to talk about the kinds of expectations that come in Mormon families that have been, you know, from you're born into the church, you're there from the cradle. But I think in wards and stakes, countries like ours, you've not only got that expectation from your family, but you've got it dialed up to 11 from the whole of the rest of your ward. So literally we would be in classes where, you know, people would be looking to your parents and other parents and saying, you are a really good example of this. Could you maybe talk about, you know, your son has went on a mission. How did you do it? Because you are one of the very, very few who did. Take us into youth then. Tell me, you've had a whole life of church. Youth becomes a little bit different. Who was your favourite youth leader in your wards?
That one is easy, to be fair. That one is easy because I did have a lot of nut jobs as youth leaders. And so, Jane, you're included in that category. No, 100%, it would have been you. You were the hope of Israel at that time, in my eyes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could take you into the journey of why am I your favourite, but, you know, we can do that any other time.
We'll do that when I need a favour from you.
So, yeah, whenever I need to be there. What have you done for me lately?
How good is that again? Tell me.
Exactly. No, but seriously, we are going to talk about some of that, you know, because the time I got to spend in youth, you are strong as you're doing great. My kid leaves, it was doing his head in, you know, so I got to see some of the complexity that you guys were experiencing, and how the answers that are in the manual, because it's already spelled out, not just, you know, here are potential questions. Here is the question, here are the answers. They just weren't cutting it for a lot of people, and it was being internalized by a lot of youth as shame. And then you can see this reflected in the adults. It's just playing out in a uniquely Mormon way for you and for your siblings, and yeah, for other kids too, I guess. But since they're not the scope of this inquiry, let us continue. Tell me about youth. What's some of the things you're discovering about the church?
Well, I think as a young teenager at the time, you begin to become aware of the world. You begin to become aware of people in your life that you want to emulate. You begin to really, really look up to people and try to mimic what they do or try to be like them. And so I think in my early days of youth, I lived for Jeffrey R. Holland at General Conference, giving his bang in the pulpit talks.
Yes,
I wanted to be like Jeffrey R. Holland. I wanted to be as spiritual as him. I would even say that some of, my the older young men at the time that were preparing for missions, that would perhaps lead activities or lead spiritual thoughts, you wanted to be like them. To me personally, there was this conscientious striving to be spiritual, to be this spiritual giant, to be a leader. And I think that's who I am naturally as well as a person, away from faith, a natural leader, and but also still following others' examples, still always trying to learn. And so I think there was an element of, in the early days of youth, of very, 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 very quickly maturing spiritually, I suppose is what you would say, and maturing in terms of knowledge of the gospel. I have always loved research. I've always loved learning. Probably get that from my dad, who's a historian. So I loved soaking up information. I loved learning as much as I could. I couldn't wait to start seminary, because to me that was the penultimate experience of doctrinal gathering and learning about the gospel. I started to be so fascinated by church history as it was told by the church at the time. And so it's this very, very quick developing into now the poster deacon, this poster boy, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to be those people that I was looking up to. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning. I think today the foundation of my faith and the foundation of my Christianity, my belief in Christ, remains the learning that I did then. Learning about the atonement, discovering the relationship that I could have with deity. A lot of that remains the foundation of what I continue to believe in today. And so I enjoyed it. But at the same time, as you are trying to grow, the leaders also want you to grow up as well. They want to start preparing you for covenants, I suppose, because ultimately you're a young man and you're going to go on a mission and you need to make temple covenants. And so, and you have the For the Strength of Youth manual. So you know that you're going to start learning about modesty, about chastity. You're going to delve into the word of wisdom a little more. You're going to delve into the rules, the structure, the parameters, the goalposts, as a Mormon message once put it. You're going to start learning about that. And there's more responsibility on you to be worthy. You now hold the priesthood. And you will only have access to priesthood power if you are worthy. And you have priesthood responsibilities. As a 12-year-old boy, you need to make sure you're worthy so that you can pass the sacrament to members in the ward. Now, of course, there's always going to be other people that can do it. But, if you don't sit at the sacrament table that Sunday morning in a small ward in Scotland, everyone is very aware that something is amiss. And so, in as much as there's this wonderful experience of learning and discovery, both in life and in faith, you become very aware of the pressure on you to be a worthy priesthood holder or a worthy temple requirement holder. And when you're that age, the questions of your relationship to Christ and your belief in the restoration and your belief in the church are not quite as paramount in your mind as your following of the rules. As a teenager, you feel that the main thing you're supposed to do to be a worthy member of the Mormon Church is the rules, and the rules become the thing, and the rules become the crux, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
And that's what you're focused on as a teenager, because naturally you want to be rebellious and discover and be curious and explore and give in to your natural inclinations, and I don't just mean on a sexual level. I just mean in a whole teenager self-discovery level. But at the same time, you've been told now you have all these rules. You've got this whole pamphlet you need to follow, and that becomes a thing. That becomes a focus. You measure your self-worth based on your ability to resist temptation, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And that becomes a huge part of teenagers' lives in the Mormon church, I would feel.
You know, having that coming from parents, leaders, coming over the pulpit at a local level and at a national level, I mean, I'm sure that she wouldn't mind me relating this, but you know, I also think about the pressure from, you know, even like siblings. I remember one of your sisters had been talking about how you know, when we dating, how it would be really rude to say no if someone asked you out on a date. And I remember being like, what do you mean it would be rude? You would go on a date with someone because you're worried about manners? And she was like, yeah, it was just so normal. And talking about, you know, a stake leader who was explaining to, you know, this was before I came back to church, but a leader who's explaining to you all, thanking the young women for dressing modestly around their sons. And as this has been relayed back to me from young women who are like, you know, that's so wonderful that was shared with us, and it reminds us of this responsibility. I'm sort of coming in to see that kind of unhealthiness, that as a leader, if I contradict, you know, that would be, your parents would have had a massive problem. Our bishop would have had a massive problem. It would have been grossly unfair to you guys. And so on a certain level, I guess you have to either assimilate that and sort of, well, you know, that is what we're going to teach and reinforce, or you just shut up about it. So I think there's a lot of disservice done to youth when we can't just be straight up honest about being human, about, yeah, so these rules, they're not always healthy. Did you have any expression for, would you have even noticed any unhealthiness around for the strength of youth or young men's personal progress?
No, at the time, what was that called, young man? The duty to God.
God. Mm-hmm.
Oh my. At the time, I still believed I was doing good, and I firmly believed that that in trying to follow those rules, that I was doing the right thing. So I would say I wasn't aware. You know, I maybe only started to consider the unhealthiness and allow me to only speak to the how some of those rules are taught rather than what is taught in this context, is that how they were taught was extremely unhealthy and extremely traumatic for me and for others, I'm aware. But at the time, you conform, just as you did as a leader. You know, you were aware of it, but you conform or you push down, and you're quiet about it. But at the time, I still believed that it was the right thing to do, and ultimately, I just didn't want to be the reason that my family wouldn't receive eternal happiness because of my own choices. And that's a my thought.
See, I find that interesting, like just when you're talking about that, because you know, it's I didn't realise how awful the For Strength of Youth was until I was an adult, and it was Jane who pointed it out to me. Because I think when you're growing up in that environment, why would you see a problem with it? You know, like you always say that, you know, like you didn't have the necessarily experience we did of growing up within the church. So we're taught it from such a young age that when, like we talk about, we're not thought to think for ourselves. You know, we just take everything as gospel and as word. So I had no reason to question how awful For Strength of Youth was, telling the girls that how they dress affects boys. And it took, I mean, how many years were you on? I mean, it's not that long ago, really. I mean, maybe something that I realised because Jane pointed out to me. I'm like, are you kidding me? It actually says that. Like, hearing it as an adult, I was like, I'm horrified. And I was in youth at the time, but still didn't pick up on it until Jane. And that's what I'm saying. And that's for me how it works. It's just you're taught it from such a young age that it becomes normal to you. You have no reason to question. You know, you do have the odd people who are critical thinkers and do know how to think for themselves. I didn't personally growing up. So, you know, I do find that quite interesting, you know, that you don't see it.
What happens then in a family like yours, and you're in youth and you have all the answers? What happens when a family member leaves the church or distances themselves?
Here I am.
Yeah, it's everyone's world crashes down, and it's a terrible thing. And people are upset, and people are crying, and people are seeking counsel from their bishops, and really it is the end of the world, and people are praying, and people are fasting. And
People are praying. Yep.
Can I jump in to just ask? So obviously, people don't just leave the church in isolation, and I'm just curious, and I hope it's okay to ask. I know that you're fine with everything. I can ask whatever I like, but are we talking about praying and concern and tears simply because of leaving the church, not issues surrounding leaving the church, like mental health issues? Or
I mean,
it's all linked, but
it's all linked and it's all considered, but really the main, no matter the state of someone's mental health that may or may not have left the church, I would suggest that in the majority of cases, the main issue is that they have left the church.
I know in my mum's experience that was the case, because she always told me, she prays that her children will one day come back to the fold. And again, it's because of that guilt, I think, that comes as a parent to make you realise that. Sorry, I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. Tell me if you need to come closer to the mic. That guilt of, where did I go wrong? I've spoken about this before. My mum often felt, where did I go wrong? What could I have done differently? They blame themselves, and they also then worry, as you said earlier, Ben, about you saying about being that one who's broken that eternal family, because we teach that you'll not be together as a family, and I find that so horrific now. And I know, I'm sure if Laura still wants to what me saying, that's one of the things Laura really struggled with. Is, are you telling me that because we've walked away from a church, that even though we're good people, we live a good life, we do good things in the world, that I'm not going to be with my family just because I don't follow a religion? And obviously I know that was such a big thing for my mum, and it was praying to come back to church. I'm not saying she didn't pray for us and our issues, but I think, like you say, Ben, that definitely seemed to be the main focus from people that I've spoken to, even myself having done it, for people to come back.
So any rebelliousness at all come in the teenage years?
Definitely. I think it's very, very natural to rebel. Absolutely. Really? And
did I just miss it all? Like, did I just not notice, or were you just really low level rebellious? Is this like, you compared to other kids these days who are like coming home, brought home by the police and stuff like that? We're not talking that level.
It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was, I suppose, rebellion maybe isn't the best word. It was just, it was just natural discovery. As any teenager, from a psychological viewpoint, they develop and they grow and they discover. You become curious when you're in high school and people start to drink or smoke. You become curious. Not necessarily interested, but you become curious. And then, of course, when you start to learn about sex, and it's so taboo when you're a teenager, and you start to hear people speak about things and mention words in the context of sexuality that you've never heard before, and naturally you're turned on, for want of a better phrase, to those those kind of conversations, and you want to be involved, you want to learn about it, you're curious, you're naturally discovering your sexuality as a teenager.
So how did you deal with shame around that? Because as you discover it and experiment with it, it doesn't just come as a positive experience on its own. You're a Mormon kid. What about the shame?
No, yeah, definitely. I remember, so I mean, I couldn't put an age on it or anything at all, but I remember when I was probably around 12 or 13 or so, and you're in high school and you hear people speak. And actually, I think actually at that point, I had there had been a class all on that topic, and So you become aware, you become more knowledgeable, you are wanting to be involved in the conversations that are happening around that subject. It's not just that you're wanting to be cool, but you also feel like, well, this is obviously something I have to learn about, and this is obviously something that I have to be involved in because it's natural, it's inherent. And so I can remember specifically an object lesson, which I know has been used a lot actually, because we've got all of these, which I now look back on and just scoff at, these ridiculous object lessons and ridiculous, probably untrue stories that are constantly passed down leader to leader to leader. And so naturally, as a young teenager, I had discovered masturbation, and it was something that the majority of young men, at least, and certainly probably many young women were doing at the time and had discovered. Naturally, it's natural and it's healthy, and good science and good psychology and good peer-reviewed studies support that, and I support that as well. And I remember at that time realizing that this ought to be something I should be ashamed of. This ought to be something I overcome at some point. This ought to be something I tell no one about, that I keep a secret. And so already you feel deceitful. You feel as though you don't have a real relationship of trust with your parents because you're keeping things from them. Now, make no mistake, people outside of the church, young teenagers experience that as well, that the relationship naturally changes with people around them when they start to do things behind parents' backs, etc. But remember, for a Mormon, on top of all of that, is that great big price hanging over your head of eternal happiness and wanting to make sure you get there with all your family and that your mum's not going to miss you there. Although I've since heard that people that are better than others can travel to other kingdoms or whatever, so maybe that was the solution. But that aside, I remember keeping this in as a young teenager, feeling ashamed of it, and always trying to overcome it, and always trying to stop, because that's what I was taught to do. It was evil, it was a sexual sin, it was very difficult, sin to overcome. It's addictive. You really, we almost dehumanize people when it comes to the law of chastity, I feel. And then there was an object lesson that was done by a young men leader at the time, who's still active in the ward actually, where they had this fresh block of wood and a long nail and a hammer. And the lesson was about chastity. I remember that. It was specifically about chastity and purity. And I remember the object lesson was, if you commit a sexual sin or an immoral sin, to do with the law of chastity, it's like this nail, and they hammer it right into the block of wood. You've committed a sin, and there's this nail on you. And then they say, but it's all right, don't worry. You can repent. There's always repentance, the power of the atonement, the redeeming power of Christ to overcome this sin. And they turn the hammer round and they remove the nail. And I remember, which, let me just say, this was personal doctrine. I do not believe that the church teaches us as doctrine. This was personal doctrine, but to me, it was the doctrine of the church at the time. But it became clear later with hindsight that this was a personal doctrine of this ill-equipped individual who was teaching youth. Repentance can remove the nail, and they taught that, unfortunately, when it comes to this category of sin, sexual sin, inasmuch as the nail is removed, that blemish will always be there. Because whenever we meet our opposite sex that we're married to, marriages between a man and a woman and a man, you will be blemished and you won't be fully pure, and you wouldn't have, it's just one thing that you can't fully ever go back on. Now, clearly that isn't what repentance generally is about and what the redeeming blood of Christ is all about, right? So it is personal doctrine, but it was taught. And why was a leader who was responsible for young adults at such an important time of their life so ill-equipped to teach youth, impressionable, vulnerable youth, about this issue? It's irresponsible. It continues to be irresponsible. The church continues, and don't get me wrong, I believe they've made great progress. I have no interest in finding out what progress they've made, but I do believe, I've been told that they've made progress in improving the way that people teach around these subjects, but it's utterly irresponsible. It's utterly irresponsible, and it has left me extremely traumatized, that specific object lesson, because I was doing what every other natural teenager was doing at the time. I was healthily discovering my sexuality, and I would rather have had a trusted adult be able to speak to me in a caring and compassionate but educative way on the subject. And for someone to have just said to me that, this is natural, this is normal, and it's okay to do this. And then maybe they could have I mean, I'm not an expert on the subject either, and I've got a long while to go before my daughter receives the sex talk. And I'm sure I can get advice, certainly not from the church, but from those who are responsible in the way that they educate young ones. But let me know. I mean, it frustrates me, and I get very passionate about it, because I just think it's so irresponsible that someone would be allowed to teach impressionable, vulnerable people on that subject at such a young age and be so ill-equipped to do so. But from a personal point of view, it was very traumatizing, because it's once you have started discovering your sexuality, including via masturbation, it's a very difficult thing to give up. Because we are human, and it's human nature to continue to discover and to grow and to blossom in our sexuality. And again, good science today and good psychology supports with evidence that there is a healthy way to discover sexuality, and that's to follow your human instincts. And so it was very traumatic for me as a teenager. I didn't realize that it was trauma at the time. I just knew that it was difficult, and I was ashamed, and I could never speak to anyone about it, and never ever did until after my mission, by the way. Never ever brought up this subject to anyone. But it's something that I have felt really impact my mental health in the last few years, and something that I have sought therapy for to try and overcome. And unfortunately, I think it's something that I will still not be able to overcome, is that Sunday in a classroom with who I would just describe as someone that may have been well-intentioned. I don't really care whether they were or not. And perhaps the church was setting these leaders up for failure, but it was an irresponsible situation. And it was very, very frustrating in hindsight to see that was allowed to happen, and that those lessons were allowed to be given. And by the way, as a side note, that lesson was also happened to be given in the one classroom in the Airdrie Ward building that had no windows. And at the time that meant nothing to me, but nowadays that also really concerns me. And my message is, for the most part, on that subject is that parents or guardians, trusted and responsible parents or guardians who are fit to do so, make the calls in terms of how their children or those that they care for are educated on sexual education. And it is not and must not be dictated by the opinions of others, because at the end of the day, when that young child is discovering their sexuality, you want them to be able to come to you, who taught them how to discover sexuality healthily. You want them to trust you enough to come to you when they have concerns, whether that's concerns over abuse, or whether that's concerns over physical dysfunctions in terms of sexual health, or psychological dysfunctions in terms of health. There's no reason that another adult should be trusted to be responsible over that conversation. I would say sex education at school is a different thing, but still, parents need to make decisions over what their children are taught and how they're taught it. And anyone that's watching, I would just urge them to be in control of what their children are being taught over that subject, because it can impact someone for the rest of their life, and it can actually be an inhibitor to a young person being able to safeguard themselves against sexual abuse when they're young and when they become an adult. It's very important stuff, and irresponsible adults shouldn't be trusted with it like that leader was. Oh, I can't hear you guys.
Sorry, Alana.
I'm trying to remember because there was a few points on there that I had thoughts on. So I'm just going back to, you with the nail story. Obviously my memories are very restricted. I do feel like I remember being taught something that I've heard other people being taught about, the chewed gum for the girls, and I find that, I would be interested to see, you're saying they've made progress, but I would be interested to see and hear from people if that is still being taught today. I would like to hope they've moved away from that, but knowing the church, it wouldn't surprise me that it is still being taught. You talked about, being healthy in regards to that and the shame. And I speak about this openly because, Jane will understand that, again, like yourself, from a young age, I had that shame. I felt so horrible about myself that I was doing this, that again, and that's what I say, it falls into that trap of then you learn how to lie from a young age, because you're doing this, you're being asked if you're doing it, but you're saying no because if you say yes, the consequences of that. So you then learn to lie from a young age, so it becomes this roll-on, knock-on effect. And even as an adult, there's not many people, again, and I'm working on that, because we have conversations about this, Ben, how we say we should as adults be able to talk about sex now within reason. I'm not saying we have to get into intimate, gory details of what we do in our sex life, but years ago I would have cringed having a conversation with my nephew about sex and the pleasures of it and different things. But I now realise that it is healthy to talk about these things because it's a natural part of life. You're saying about the opinions of others. We have experts like Natasha Helfer, shout out to her for all the amazing things she does to help people to learn that it is, who speak out and say it's a healthy, normal part of life. But yet the church is so against it and causing pain in others, causing even people to self-harm, to even worse, take their lives because of the shame and guilt. And I'm thinking, how can the church not see the damage that's caused from what they teach in comparison to the experts? Now, people within the church are not experts on this matter. They're not. We have experts who are speaking out on this and saying that we need to learn how to be inquisitive. And even as an adult, I've had conversations with Jane where that shame and guilt is still with me. Even to this day, I don't want to put this image in people's mind, but, we're talking about it,
Yeah.
I still struggle to a certain degree with that shame and guilt. When I'm still exploring, I feel so sheltered as an adult. I still don't know all of my body parts the way I should. Jane knows that because she'll talk about something and I'm like, what's that? What are you talking about? I'm a 40-year-old adult and I don't know my body as I should as an adult because it's such a shameful thing growing up within a religion, and it's awful. And I really do hope for the future that the church does change on that, because it's normal and natural part of life.
So one of the ways that Alana, I think actually this might have been the defining moment in our first becoming really, really good friends. And I remember we were sitting in our ward building in the foyer with this enormous picture of Jesus behind us. And Alana was having real problems with migraines, and it was just, just feeling really, really rubbish. And we're just sitting outside privately. And I said, have you tried masturbation? And in your face,
genuinely,
you managed to keep it together so well. And I just thought, unless someone, I think, has the confidence to start speaking and normalizing these types of conversations. I remember you were in one of the classes. I think I'd been teaching Sunday school for such a short amount of time. It wasn't a lengthy calling that I held. But, I remember this was the most requested subject, was to talk about issues around chastity. And I remember that just this real impression that somebody needs to know your story. Somebody needs to know, because it's such a private thing. Everybody doesn't have the right to my life or my knowledge. It's nobody's business. But and I do remember, over I think it would be maybe a couple of months later, speaking with one of the youth in the class, to talk about, my experience in porn use. I wouldn't use the terms. In fact, that's not true. I did use the term pornography addiction. I don't believe an addiction model should apply to pornography. I don't think it's the right model to address it, if it needs to be addressed at all, in fact. My bisexuality, just mentioning it in a casual conversation, and that moment changed everything. I realized how much other people need for these conversations to be part of normal discourse. And okay, you don't go to church to maybe hear about how to appropriately use your body. We talk about bodies all the time in church. It's core to Mormon doctrine, having a body. And yet there's this huge element of having one that we are not, we just turn it to, how we efficiently turn it to shame is nothing short of magnificent. I love what you said. I think limiting the atonement in any way is appalling, and how dare we assume that we can do that. I guess also the other thing maybe I'd say about your comment, often I think when we leave the teaching of healthy sexuality to parents, sometimes those parents are so uneducated themselves, and we have lots of parents who would prefer to handle the subject themselves, and it means that basically they don't realize when something age appropriate has just come around the corner that they weren't prepared for. What are your plans for how you're going to talk about it as Callie gets older?
Yeah, that's something that's very personal to Alicia and I. It's something that we do discuss. So I think the main thing is that Alicia and I, just based on her own experiences, and then based on experiences of those in my family, our main thing, I think, for our daughter would be that we both want her to have an unfailing trust in Alicia and I. We feel that if she trusts us, if she fully trusts us, and she feels that she can speak to us guilt-free, shame-free, without fear of serious discipline or us flying off the handle or shaming her, that we can safely, that we can healthily safeguard her, because we need to protect the children. We need to safeguard young people when it comes to this subject, and when it comes to sexual health. And so if heaven forbid anything was to ever happen to Callie, we would want her to come to us straight away. And I really do believe, and listen, I am not on this podcast to bash. I'm not here to bash the devil's pulpit, and I am just sharing my experience. And in my experience, we have crafted a very dangerous and unsafe environment for victims of sexual abuse in the Mormon Church. Victims of sexual abuse, whether that's child sexual abuse, adolescent sexual abuse, or adult sexual abuse, those individuals are unsafe in the majority of cases, if not all, in the Mormon Church. They are not in the safest place they can be. And
absolutely,
I want to undo all of the thinking processes. I want to undo all of the behaviors, all of the knee-jerk reactions that I have seen to comments, confessions, or questions, or a box of tampons sitting on a table, and the horrified reaction of the priesthood holders in the house. All of that I want to undo, because if my child is ever unsafe, or is ever in a position that she may be unsafe, I want her to, without hesitation, come to me and to come to Alicia. And when she kisses her first boy or girl, we want to be the first to know, not anybody else, and we want to celebrate that moment with her. And let's be realistic, in as much as Aunt Alana will know how open I am about this topic, but we still respect people's boundaries. Obviously, Aunt Alana has her boundaries. Jane, you didn't even want to see a picture of the bed in her honeymoon.
No, I don't want to see a picture of your bed, Ben. Goodness, yes, yes.
But
I have issues.
there are boundaries, and we need to respect one another's boundaries. Boundaries are extremely healthy, and we need to be respectful of what people are willing to discuss and what people are not willing to discuss. So I'm not, I wouldn't describe myself as a nudist hippie, and there's nothing wrong with being a nudist hippie. That's not what I would, this sex obsessed, the Miriam Margolyes, I'm not that, and there's nothing wrong with being that. I just want to celebrate the body that we have been given, the body that has been created, G-spots and all. And that's how I feel. And as well as that, more than anything, I want to be able to be in a position where Alicia and I can equally and collaboratively protect our daughter and any other children that we have, that we are able to safeguard her as a team. And as I say, based on my experiences, that's not instilled in parents and guardians in the church, sadly, and in the majority of cases. And the research of Sam Young and others in this community very, very clearly demonstrate that in a grassroots way.
Ben, that is absolutely beautiful. And I just want to kind of honour how I see your approach working with people, how it's, whenever you were that little kid in youth, and I remember I was walking, you guys, there was some kind of activity in our home and you guys were all hanging around, and I'm drinking Bovril. So it's a hot drink, and it's basically a cup of gravy, guys. It's nasty unless it's a Scottish drink.
It's a drink.
Bloody delicious, all right. Let's
yes.
face it. But anyway, and you had just walked by, saying, "Oh, you enjoying your coffee?" And it was so matter of fact and so non-judgmental, and it's a lovely evening.
That being said,
wait, it's yeah.
That being said, I don't know what age that was, but I did probably become one of the most judgmental Scottish Mormons in my later years, and there's many people that can testify to that.
Oh, Ben, I love you. I love that. Well, we're going to
Ben was all in. I used to be like, is he for real? Like, genuinely, because I've never been that. I don't even know how to compare it to him, but I was never that all pure TBM. When I was there, I gave my best, but I was never to the extent that Ben was. He genuinely, because I used to think, right, Ben, calm down, son, because it was just so all in. It was, all this knowledge, all this, and I'd just be like, right, battle.
So for our viewers who haven't joined us before, just so that we can re-emphasize something Ben was saying for a bit of context, we are not here to sit and criticize the church. We talked about families before and what happens as families are trying to understand why someone leaves. What happens as families try to make sense of what their eternity will look like, as families are trying to unpack those dynamics. All of our wards, all of our friends are leaving, and Ben is one of those people. Alana's,
my whole family.
Getting to that exactly. And so we are having those conversations about what the hell is going on. What is being missed at church? What are the things that if you turned up to church on a Sunday that you wish were being talked about, to the point where it's becoming a huge barrier for people who are in church? What happens when you come to church and you can't find Christ there because you're finding all of this stuff? What happens when people who have loved the church for their whole life decide that it is not right, have a faith deconstruction, reconstruction, whatever that looks like? And we're not having these conversations that we really need to be having about, if this is your religion, you should know your stuff. Come on. We are given manuals full of stuff every week. So we want to be having those conversations that, yes, are difficult. I am an active member. Alana has taken a step back, and so we speak to that tension every week. This is the complexity that we live in. This is the complexity of life. So we wanted to give that context. Also, when Ben is Ben, when we are speaking, especially when you know I'm having a spike in my OCD, one thing you always ask for is about boundaries. You'll always ask, is it okay if I'm speaking about this, or is this going to potentially be triggering? And I really appreciate it. So I think if you're applying those kind of principles to parenting, I just think you're setting yourself up for great success.
Can I just really backtrack, because I just remembered one other question that I had regarding all these chewed gum stories and nail and the wood and stuff like that. Have they ever throughout the years actually been in a lesson manual? Does anyone know that? Has it ever been in a church lesson manual, or is it just people's own ideas? I'd be interested to know that.
I couldn't speak to that.
Yeah, but I'm just asking generally, even to the audience, if anyone's aware, have those stories ever been in a youth manual to be taught to our youth? Or is it just people's ideas? So if anyone has any proof of that, please send it over to me so that I can have a nosy. Yeah, I would just be interested to know.
Also, thank you for all the comments. Keep talking in the chat. We're going to move on to our next sort of subject, but Sarah's there to signpost if anyone needs any help or support with the things that we've been discussing so far. Because we're having a party at Alana's tonight, I can't see the comments just as easy as I normally can, so I might not be getting to pop them all up on the screen. Thank you. Keep commenting, though. We're really enjoying the chat. Okay, I guess we're still in youth time, because there's something that I want to talk about, which is you're in youth and you have this really interesting drive. I think on some level, your family are very aware of having to be the people that fix everything or do everything in the ward. If you guys aren't there, then it won't happen. And that's just, I'm saying that as someone who can very clearly see that. And you seem to just not get sick of it. You seem to just sort of accept it that was you guys, that was your role and your calling. And then you started talking about the Joseph Smith Nashville trip. Is it Nashville band a tribute to Joseph Smith?
Yeah.
Yes. And you decided you wanted to put that on as a production in the ward. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that was my first experience of getting to work with you. This little kid in youth who's got these big ideas and actually needed zero help whatsoever. You'd asked for my support, and I'm just like stepping back and letting you get on with it. What was that like for you?
I would just, the Nashville trip, I'm a musician. I love music. I worship today through music. That's how I practice my faith. And it's always been a huge part of my life. And hearing that music, it was a tribute to Joseph Smith and the restoration of the gospel, was probably one of the first real testimony builders for me. It wasn't EFY, because EFY was a disaster and I continue to despise it. But this album of music, Jason Deere, who wrote the music, is an incredible writer in country music and secular music, but happens to be a member of the church, wrote this incredible album with a few other writers. It really formed my testimony at that age. I was a huge country music fan as well, and the music is country. And so I just wanted other people to benefit from this music. I wanted other people's testimonies to be built up from it. And I wanted to draw upon the talents of the ward. And so we put on that production. We were able to teach the restoration, and we were able to kind of try and build people's testimonies of the restoration of the church, and Joseph Smith, the prophet of the restoration. And I would say that was the beginning of a journey that took me to a place I could have never, ever, ever imagined in my wildest dreams. That was certainly the beginning of my musical and performing career within the church.
But it is the first sort of, I don't know, big introduction to church history that you're having, the first immersive, because you were living, breathing that stuff for a really long time.
Yes, it was very basic. It was the kind of prominent stories and But yeah, certainly would have been the first kind of delving into church history to a very, very small extent.
And then we moved on to, so what was the next one? It was the tribute to the pioneers.
Yeah, there was another album brought out, the Trek, so a tribute to the pioneers, and of course their stories remain incredible and incredibly moving. Heartbreaking story of refugees, people that were persecuted. So really, really tugged on the heartstrings. Still does, for what those people went through, those early saints, and what they sacrificed. And so another great opportunity to build people's testimonies via music.
Okay, this then the Mormon dream is happening. It is now time for you to get the old mission papers in. Talk to me about is a mission, is serving a mission, and is it what you want? I mean, it's inevitably what's going to happen. What kind of tensions do you have there?
So I did not want to serve a mission. The age had been changed to 18 as I was getting closer to the time. I did not want to serve a mission. At the time, I was very in love with another girl. I thought, maybe I'm like the Osmonds. They didn't have to serve missions. They were called to music. Maybe I'm just called to this girl. Maybe I don't have to serve a mission. And to be honest, I just really, really didn't like the idea of knocking doors all the time. A mission sounded really boring to me. I was a bit of a home bird in certain ways. And so, no, I didn't want to serve a mission. So I delayed it to begin with. I delayed the preparation, didn't take any mission prep classes. But then I got involved in the first ever pageant in the UK. I auditioned for that because it was again a marrying of my love for musicianship and performing, and the church, and faith and the doctrine of the church. So I got involved in the British pageant, and when I did the British pageant for the first year, I didn't realise it then, but I met some of the greatest people in my life, and they remain the greatest people in my life. They're very, very influential on all accounts, but particularly from a spiritual viewpoint. They were the ones that managed to help me come to the realisation that I should serve a mission. So yeah, I did the audition for the British pageant, did that here in the UK, and at the end of that, the managing director of the priesthood department, it wasn't a 4-hour audition, no, that's probably my accent, Paul. The managing director of the priesthood department, who came over to see the pageant, then asked me and another individual if we would be willing to move to America to work voluntarily for the church. They would provide a stipend, and to perform in a running production that's performed on Temple Square every year called Saviour of the World, which is about the Saviour's birth and resurrection. So I was involved in that. I then ended up being involved in writing for the 100-year anniversary celebration that was held in the conference centre of the relationship, which has since been ended, between the Boy Scouts of America and the Mormon Church. I performed in that as well. It was broadcast across the world. I was still in Saviour of the World at the time. I had gone down to Tuacan Amphitheatre to perform there with people from the pageants, involved in helping to write for the youth music that was coming out the following year. Ended up in the music video for it as well, recording that. Ended up in the priesthood department, kind of unofficial choir, where we would go and perform for leaders in the church. We would go into their rooms where they were having dinners. We sang for Jeffrey R. Holland whilst he was sitting there having a meal. So this very, very surreal experience where I went from a very localized Mormon experience in Scotland, very, very run-of-the-mill, not American at all experience in Scotland, to being right at the heart of it.
Is this the same time? Is this the same period of time where you are in the production with Jonathan Rhys Davis?
John Rhys Davis. So that was also yes, that was actually one of the other main projects that I was flown over to work on. So
okay, talk about that, because that was bloody cool. That was
that's still a big highlight for me. So David Warner, who at the time was the managing director of the priesthood department, he for many, many years, I believe, had the Mormon Tabernacle Choir Christmas concert is a huge deal. They do it every year. It's broadcast the following year on PBS, and it is the most watched Christmas television special in the United States of America, not just within the church, but the whole nation. It's the most watched Christmas special on cable over there. And David Warner, and all of those shows, there's always a kind of 20-minute dramatization that happens, and there's always a story that shares the Christmas message. And that year it was a story about how Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, and David Warner always wrote those 20-minute dramatizations. And he was the one that was flying me over for Saviour of the World, and he was also wanting me to be involved because of my British accent, my British upbringing, and whatever he saw in me and believed in me, to be involved in this Christmas concert. And they always have a guest star at the Mormon Tabernacle Choir Christmas concert, and it was John Rhys Davis, who plays Gimli in the Lord of the Rings, that I performed alongside. And I had probably to this day one of the greatest experiences of my life. For a young Mormon boy who loved music, who loved the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, you know, musical flaws and all, to be standing in the conference center with 22,000 people, having the Tabernacle Choir singing behind me performing on the stage with John Rhys Davis, and those people that I mentioned, who still are some of the most important people in my life, they were with me, performing with me. Some of my best friends, and then the orchestra at Temple Square in front of me, and it all being live, and just being where I never, ever thought I would be, remains one of the most rich experiences of my life. Just an incredible experience. So I was at the heart of it. I was, I was right in the middle of it, right there at church headquarters, involved in everything that I could be involved in, and just loving life. Had the greatest time, and it was in that time that I had been convinced that the mission was the correct choice, and I was fully convinced of that at the time, and really wanted to serve a mission. Put in my mission papers. I was able to,
no, I don't think I've ever asked you. You just snuck in there in your CV. Now, that is badass enough to be performing on a stage live with the tab choir behind you, this amazing actor, but you're also performing private concerts for Jeffrey R. Holland and his ilk. I mean, that's got to be surreal. Tell me about that.
Well, if you're on Temple Square, if you're working on Temple Square on a regular basis, you're going to bump into these guys, whether they're walking over to their super mall for food, or whether they are walking through the tunnels. And by the way, the tunnels aren't anything magical like we believe over here in Europe. There's nothing magical or mysterious about the tunnels under Temple Square.
Tell people about the rumours.
There are rumours that there's kind of secret rooms down there, and that there's these secret tunnels all the way up to the vault in the mountain. And in fact, I even heard a rumour that existed back in, I think, the 70s in the UK, that there was a tunnel from the UK all the way to Utah where they would send women to be married off to these American poster boy.
Yeah, we do love an urban legend over here, but you actually got to see the tunnels.
I was in the tunnels, and they're only there for convenience and security for these prominent and high up leaders in the church. And it wasn't full concerts, and it honestly wasn't happening regularly. It was just the odd time the priesthood department choir would be singing in a meeting that Jeffrey R. Holland was conducting, or I'm sure one time we performed after Saviour of the World for Dieter F. Uchtdorf and his family, because he has a family tradition to take all of his family to see Saviour of the World every year. So just singing a song or so, whilst they're just trying to enjoy their dinner and we're there singing. They were probably
ordinary then, like
just thinking, go away and leave us alone. But for a young Mormon boy, you think you've made it, and you think that, and really you have, in terms of being at the heart of the church. and being around the people that you look up to twice a year, well, all year, but you see them twice a year. It really was, goodness me, how did this happen?
Yeah, and as I've alluded to multiple times, you are your ward is experiencing your life vicariously through you. This is an Airdrie ward person who's going to do all of this stuff, and we were part of his story and his his growing up, and it's so exciting for us to be able to watch that unfold. And so the mission, you can see how it was inevitable. What happens next then?
So after I had spent some time in America, I had come home to Scotland because my records were still a membership record. So for those of you that don't know, if you're going on a mission, you have to put in your mission papers from wherever your records are. Those private performances were either backstage at Saviour of the World or in conference rooms in the administration building, which is where the general authorities meet, or in meetings in the Joseph Smith Memorial Building and chapels. It just depended where they happened to be. The general authorities are actually out and about more than you think. So come back to Scotland, decided to put in my mission papers, and then I received an assignment once my mission papers were in to go and perform in the Nauvoo Pageant, which was the following year after spending the Christmas season in America, which is everything I described there. And so I put my mission papers in, headed over to Utah to begin what we call workshops in theatre terms, where you're kind of workshopping and developing at the pageant, which we did in the Conference Centre Theatre. There's a small theatre next to, so in the exact same building where General Conference is held, there's a small theatre that seats 800 people, where Saviour of the World is performed, and that's where we workshop the pageant before we head out to Nauvoo to perform over there. And I received a call that my mission papers were ready and I could just pop across the street to get them. And so all of the family are on Skype, and I'm opening my mission papers, and I was called to the Belgium-Netherlands mission. I had to report to the MTC in Provo by the 16th of September of that same year. So I finished the pageant in August, had a little bit of fun in America, headed back home, packed up, got ready, and flew back over to Utah to go to the MTC to learn Dutch and how to be a missionary.
And so the next thing, I'm just going to be totally selfish and just talk about my experience of your story, because that's all that matters, right? Obviously, jump in with any relevant stuff that's happened as part of that. But the next time we see you is when your parents have given us a heads up that conference, the priesthood session of this particular conference, this is the one to watch. This is going down. So I stay up with my son, who is a huge Ben fan. He was in youth with Ben, and was a huge fan of the Prof at the time, President Monson at the time. And all of a sudden, we can hear. Do you know, I am so sorry. I really did hope that we would have a clip of this ready to let you all relive this moment. But suddenly, Ben Hunter kicks off the choir solo. You're singing a solo in conference, and we're all thinking, has this ever happened before? And no, you made history by doing that. So tell us a little bit about how did this happen?
Can I just jump in and say, I think that was one of the only times in a long time I ever watched conference.
And it was a priesthood session as well, yeah.
So that was I was just very, very fortunate. Someone that I really, really respect still to this day is a man called Ryan Eggett. I want to get his job titles right, but I'm not going to, and I know that he's just changed jobs. In fact, I think currently he's working on the new hymn book for the church. He's part of that team. But at the time, anyway, he had a calling, it wasn't a job, to lead the MTC choirs. And it was just luck that year, the Provo MTC were providing a priesthood choir for the priesthood session at General Conference. the way that bureaucratically the structure of the church works is that the majority of music, depending on the event and depending on the context, is managed. At the time, it was managed by the priesthood department, and music fell under that, so music and cultural arts department. And I had just spent 3-4 months working with them, volunteering with them, performing in Saviour of the World and blah, 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 with the same people that to an extent were overseeing. So it was a lady called Sister Bastian, an incredible woman. And actually her daughter, after Sister Bastian retired, her daughter, who I'm good friends with, has now taken over and is doing an amazing job of managing the music in the church worldwide. Although they still don't have enough happy clappy songs as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Someone's asking that, Ben, what year was that?
This was 2014, the October priesthood session. And so I auditioned for the choir, got into the choir. There were a number of arrangements that we were learning. There was a new arrangement. There was this arrangement of Ye Elders of Israel that was brought up. And Ryan Eggett, that was leading the choir, mentioned in a rehearsal that he just felt inspired, I suppose, to have a soloist perform the beginning of it, but it was so unprecedented and maybe self-serving to that soloist, and it may be unfair, blah, 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 blah. So he wasn't sure if it was going to happen. But what usually happens when a guest choir is performing at conferences, someone from music and cultural arts will come out and see the choir and make sure that it's to a good standard and that the arrangements are going to work, the arrangements are approved, that it's sounding good, etc., etc. And that happened to be Sister Bastian, who I was familiar with. And she suggested that I do it to Ryan Eggett. And he asked me if I would do it, and I said yes. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I also dealt with feeling like it was very unfair because there were a few other great singers that were in the choir. But I was asked to do it, and I'm very, very, very happy to do it. And actually, I don't, as far as I can remember, I don't think I told anyone apart from my sister Amber exactly what was happening. I think I just told people to make sure they watched that session because I would be singing in the choir, and the cameramen at the conference centre know me, so they'll probably give me screen time, I think is what I said. And so no one actually knew that it was happening. And it was a really, really fantastic experience. It was very, very nerve-wracking, but it felt great to do it. And at the time, again, it just... There probably was an element of arrogance and pride of, I'm wonderful that I'm getting to do this, but to me, it was a beautiful experience to hear the prophet at the time finish speaking, and then to be able to sing after he spoke. At the time, that was just a surreal.
We are trying to see if we can find the link to stick it down in the comments just now, and hopefully if we can manage to catch it, we'll be able to put it up on the screen. Yeah, if you keep talking then. So you kick off your mission with this big surreal experience. Your mission kind of continues to be a bit surreal, right?
Yes, I did not have the run-of-the-mill mission, definitely not. I obviously finished up at the MTC, flew out to Belgium and the Netherlands, started my mission in a small little town called Hoorn.
And you're enjoying everything? Your experiences are spiritual and you're getting a lot out of them? Or
No, I thoroughly enjoyed the MTC. There were elements of it that I found really, really difficult, but I would say for the most part, I enjoyed the MTC. I really enjoyed the people that were coming to the mission with me. I had made some great friendships and relationships. So the MTC, for the most part, was a good experience, in as much as I see problematic things about it now, but not really prominent in my mind, any of that stuff. But great experience, feeling good. Couldn't wait to get out to Belgium and the Netherlands. Really looking forward to serving the mission.
Okay, we've actually managed to. Is would you mind? Can we share this on our screen? let's have a little look
Okay.
at what happened. Let's hopefully.
And I apologise for my daughter making all the noise in the background.
Hopefully we should be able to share it here. You can let us know if this works or if it doesn't work. But this right here is our Ben. Okay, so we don't even know if that actually. Oh, do you know what? It didn't share properly, and we just closed it down. Right, I'm so sorry, guys. That was a moment of silence. We will. We'll share the link, but this is it.
We have to.
Oh, we will. We've got all of your photographs from your years throughout the church. We're just going to go for it all. Okay, so you're now serving. You've got your assignment, and you're starting off your first few weeks. You've full of the Spirit. Keep talking about where you're up to in your story.
So I get sent to Hoorn, which was in the very, very, very far north of North Holland in the Netherlands. So North Holland is like the province. And I was sent up to Hoorn, had a fantastic trainer, the most amazing ward that I could have possibly started in. Really, really great folks up there. That's true. I met my now sister-in-law in the MTC. Kidding, that's true. I met her before I met my wife. Yes, so head out there. It's cold, it's wet, we're close to the sea. I started to struggle a little bit, and we were really knocking doors an awful lot. And it became so obvious to me that knocking doors was completely useless. Now, there were, what do you call them, assistants to the president and other missionaries, and there'll still be people to this day that will argue with me that it was productive, but I'm sorry, it wasn't. Knocking doors was not productive. Culturally, it just was a breach of people's privacy. It was rude in that country to knock doors. Now, don't get me wrong, many people in my mission had success knocking doors, I don't deny that, but it wasn't working for me, and I was not going to do that for 2 years, not even for the Lord. And I don't think he expected me to do that, because he values my mental health a lot more than he values my ability to mundanely knock doors for 2 years. And so I went to my mission president and said, look, I am not feeling overly productive. I feel like I'm not achieving anything. I have an idea. I'm musical. I've shared the gospel for the last few years via music. Allow me to put together a quartet of 4 elders. We'll put together a show that is approachable for members and non-members alike, and let me tour the whole mission. Let me visit every single area. Let us perform in every single ward and branch, and let me do that for the duration of my mission, and I will be a lot more successful. And I said, and what we'll do is the week before our performance in that area, we'll go out and we will role play with the members to teach them how to invite people to this event, and to build confidence in the members and build a relationship with the members. And so my mission president, Alden Robinson, I love him to this day. One of the greatest men I have ever been associated with. He believed in it straight away. He loved music, and he said, if you can make it happen, you have my support. And so in the space of, I think, 6 weeks, is probably my companions at the time could correct me, but in the space of about 6 weeks, we wrote an hour and a half show, which kind of pointed out principles of the church and principles of the plan of salvation and the restoration. There was a whole part about Joseph Smith in a very, very approachable, non-doctrinal, indoctrinating way. And we took my inspiration from Our Story Goes On, which I've performed in many times. I've directed Our Story Goes On here in the UK since, where we tell stories of life and how the gospel can be interwoven into those experiences and bless people's lives. And so for my whole mission, I toured visited every single area, almost, apart from one. Visited almost every unit, ward or branch. And we were known as the zingende elders, so the singing elders. And believe it or not, the Netherlands had their very own singing elders in the 60s and 70s that did the same thing. But
Really?
I had no idea. It was someone that told me later on, and they had actually saved the news articles of that were in the newspaper of that. So me and these three other elders, we had gained celebrity status in the church in the Netherlands and Belgium. People were travelling long distances to see the show before it got to their area, because word just spread like it does in the Mormon world. And really, the groundwork wasn't necessarily done by us four elders in terms of baptisms and confirmations. It was the missionaries that stayed in that area that rode the wave that we had kind of started off. So really credit to them for the success that was had on the mission.
And so there was success. What kind of difference did it make in terms of numbers and
There was an increase in baptisms and confirmations, certainly. I don't know how great that increase was. I don't think it was quantified. Difficult to quantify. But there was an increase in contacts. That was the biggest thing. Missionaries in areas were left with more contacts, because they would obviously proselytize before and after and get referrals from the people that members had invited, who were feeling very, very inspired. You know, I was participating in just the best structured affinity fraud I can imagine. But it was really successful, and it was an incredible experience. And actually, two of the original singing elders that I worked with remain and I don't speak to them very often at all, but they remain two of the most incredible people in my life, the most influential people in my life, and some of the greatest friends I've ever made. And I had the richest experience touring Belgium and the Netherlands. I still feel Dutch through and through. Sorry to Belgium. I am Scottish, but I feel very, 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 very Dutch, and my ancestry is Dutch paternally. I love the country, love the people, love the members, and had an incredible experience. Generally speaking, touring that mission and getting to know those people and growing to love them, and having some of the most sacred experiences with, for example, a lady and her husband who we visited, who had a young family. This lady was terminally ill. She had been given a prognosis a period of time before they anticipated her passing. And we as a singing elders were able to visit her home and sing a song that still means a lot to me. It's called the Pilgrim Song. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir have performed it. And the line is, "I'm going to live forever." And that's a truth I still believe in. And it's a truth I believed in at the time. And we were able to sing that intimately in her home. And to me, that remains one of the most sacred experiences I've had to date. And I still reflect on my experiences, for the most part, as extremely sacred and extremely beautiful, and so rich, traveling and meeting these people and performing for them. And I gave my life to it. I could not give any more.
Well, and you all were. Things at home, in the meantime, before you've left for your mission, Alana's returned to church activity. Your family had a tough time. It was like everything that could possibly be thrown at your family was all happening. You were obviously concerned about your family too, but you're having these incredible spiritual experiences, and your family are holding on to those too. What happened?
In terms of what happened to me?
Yeah.
So I think, to put it in, let me just be really honest right now. When you've asked that question, the first thing that's come to my mind, and this is just to illustrate for you what I'm about to speak about, which is my concern over the dangerous and life-threatening cultures that exist on missions, and my experience with that when you ask that question, the very first thing I think about, I can see certain missionaries that were in the mission at the time. And I'm thinking, are they watching this? Because I know that they had a completely different opinion. They did not think I worked my ass off. They did not think I was successful as a missionary. So that just shows how much I'm still affected by it. And it's really frustrating to think that that would be the thought that would come to me, that you know, that's me just being vulnerable and honest. I led this whole project. I did have the administrative assistance of someone that I absolutely love, him and his wife, that were missionaries, but from the Netherlands, that were called to serve in that mission, that were a huge, 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 huge help administratively to the project. But for the most part, I was, and I should say that my other companions, Elder Reese, Elder Conachi, and Elder Power, were completely supportive and amazing, incredible people. And so I, for the most part, I felt like I had a lot of weight on my shoulders. I felt a huge sense of responsibility to make this project successful, because I was the one that said, I'm not going to do the run-of-the-mill mission. I'm no knocking doors. I want to do something more meaningful.
Can I just jump in real quick and just ask something? So see, when you said that there was some missionaries who said that you didn't work your butt off, basically, do you think that's because you weren't doing the normal run-of-the-mill, so they thought that that wasn't a mission? Do you feel that?
I think that, yes, but also we were still young and immature, and in my opinion, they were very jealous of the fact that, and they may disagree, but to me it was blatantly obvious that many people were jealous of my position. And I get that. There were people out there knocking doors all day, and I was traveling around and getting to perform and sing. But they could have taken their own initiative, and they could have, you know, started their own projects. And you know, their misery doesn't discredit my success, and their jealousy doesn't discredit my efforts. You know, I gave my life to it, literally, you know, gave my life to it almost. And so I think as well, what I've got to say is, at that, you tend to see mental illnesses surface, and you tend to see people, not just people that are on missions, but I think it's just to do with the age of young adults. People start to become very symptomatic of their mental ill health around 18, 19, 20, 21. Research has shown that, that's a point where a lot of people can become very symptomatic. And so I had a lot of pressure on my shoulder. I was traveling around a lot. I was tired. And so the project started in 2015 to 2014. I went on my mission. 2015 is when the project started. Towards the end of the year, in the middle of the year, my lifeline at the time was my friend Elder Power, Lane Power. Felt like he was keeping me alive. He was my companion. He had gone home. He'd finished his mission, so I knew Singing Elder had transferred in. But then my mission president was also finishing his 3 years as well. We were getting a new mission president. And it was clear from the very, very beginning that this mission president did not support the project, wanted to take a traditional approach, didn't take away from the fact that the project had been successful, but wanted to wrap it up as soon as the tour was ending. And the plan was to end the tour, to visit everywhere, and to do a farewell concert, farewell Christmas concert in Zoetermeer, which is where the temple was, the newest church building with the state-of-the-art equipment. We got a big budget for it. You know, an external company bringing in sound and AV equipment, big, massive deal. This concert was huge, and people were traveling from England, and people were traveling from France to come and see this. It was the last chance to see, you know, the modern day Singing Elders, I suppose. And I was trying, towards the end of 2015, I was trying to write this show and have it ready. It was just me that was doing it on my own. And I'm not talking about writing the dialogue. I'm talking about writing vocal arrangements, which can be so tiring. Writing arrangements for violin, for piano. Our friend came up from Belgium to play the piano, and a world-class violinist, Vesna Grootman, you can Google her, she's world-renowned, member of the church in the Netherlands, was playing violin, and all of these people coming for the final concert. And I felt a great deal of pressure to make this concert what everyone was hoping it to be. At the same time, I was aware that my mission president didn't support, my new mission president didn't support the project. There were, I started to become very impatient with those around me. I started to be nasty to those around me, even though I loved my fellow singing elders, loved them more than anyone at the time. I noticed myself starting to become very, very irritable, very, very exhausted, very down and frustrated and sad about the fact that the project was ending. Why is it ending? It's been successful. It's made a difference. Why is it coming to an end? Starting to hear whispers from other elders and other sisters saying, that I'm not working hard. I got a terrible phone call from the assistants to the president where they were saying, you're not working hard enough, and you need to. Even if you're still touring, we're still responsible for the area that we were assigned to, our base. We're still responsible for proselytizing there on our days off, and our numbers were not great because we were tired. We were absolutely exhausted when we came back from traveling to Belgium and touring and meeting with people. And the majority of people we met with were having incredible spiritual experiences, and there was emotions. And so we're exhausted. It was difficult to keep up with the schedule and continue to proselytize on our days off. So feeling a lot of pressure about getting the concert right, and feeling completely unsupported by the mission president and the assistants to the president. And feeling sad that the project is coming to an end, and dreading the fact that I knew I would be going back to knocking doors, and I felt like it didn't work, and it was just destroying me. And then feeling so ashamed and so angry with myself that I was treating the people around me so poorly. It eventually came to a head when we were in Rotterdam rehearsing very late at night, beyond missionary curfews. I think I had been awake, I reckon, looking back at kind of journals and emails, I reckon I had been awake for 3 days and had maybe only had like a 10-minute nap in cars going to get food and whatnot. I had only been eating bananas and drinking water. I was just constantly working on the Christmas concert and absolutely pushing the other elders to their limits to practice the arrangements till all hours to get this concert right. I became so fixated on getting this perfect, and I think I wanted to prove myself to the mission president. I wanted to prove that it could be successful. So there was just so much pressure. I hadn't eaten for 3 days very much. I was only drinking, a little bit of water and just working, had barely slept. And my one of the other elders had found me in the bathroom, completely delirious, coming in and out of consciousness, and extremely unwell. And I cannot thank this elder enough. That's Elder Konachi from Brazil. He knew that although him and I weren't companions at the time, so we wouldn't be going back to the same apartment together, he knew that I would only feel safe with him. And he knew, just because of the dynamics at the time and relationship issues that I had caused with my companion, he phoned the mission president and essentially instructed him on what he would be doing. He said, I'm doing what's best for Elder Hunter, and I'm taking him home and I'm taking care of him, and he needs medical attention. And so I was taken home, and I just rested for, I think, 2 days or so. I can't really remember. It's a bit of a blur. It was complete burnout, and it was extreme depression. Depression that I have not ever experienced before then or since then, and suicide ideation. Very strong self-deprecating thoughts, and just wanting to end all the pressure, end all the shame, end all the guilt as quickly as I could. A complete and utter mission burnout. There was no one there keeping me safe. And so, apart from Lipe Konachi, right, that other elder. And so,
Ben, that's what I wanted to ask about. You mentioned he's the person that you feel safe with. What kind of physically safe, emotionally, spiritually, mentally safe?
Everything. I felt very, very, very safe and very, very affectionate towards this elder, and we were very, very close friends.
So the natural thing that it makes me want to ask is, then you've clearly then feeling not safe with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Feeling extremely lonely, feeling, like there's no one to support me here. I'm completely burning out. I'm running out of options. I'm trying to run this project, and I feel like there's not really anyone supporting me. And feeling like this isn't safe. This doesn't feel right. Something is going terribly wrong. I am not a nasty person. Why am I being so horrible to these people I love? It was a total mental breakdown.
At this point, how often can you speak to home?
The rules at the time were you could only email home once a week, and our rules were that you spent, I believe it was half an hour emailing home, and then 15 minutes emailing your mission president. That was the rules, and I broke them all the time. I would email for as long as I wanted to, and I couldn't care less, to be perfectly honest with you. And actually, once I started to get really, really unwell, I contacted home as often as I wanted. I just didn't care anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was difficult because the people that I felt I would usually rely on for emotional support when I'm feeling that way, although I hadn't felt that way up until that point, was my family, my parents, and I didn't have access to them. I really, really didn't. And also, to begin with, I didn't want to tell them what was going on. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want anyone to think I was coming home early. I just wanted to keep it to myself. I was in denial a bit as well. So it was all of that. It was all of that.
So you are undiagnosed as some kind of potential mental health condition maybe beginning to surface. You have a lack of sleep. You are tired from the sheer volume of work you're doing.
And keep in mind, I'd been touring 2 countries for almost a year as well.
Traveling.
To that, yeah.
Your diet is clearly not being maintained effective. It's the first thing that goes when you're on a mission. You don't have a whole lot of choice around what you're doing there. There's the physical requirements, the spiritual pressure, the highs and lows of all of that. You have little contact with your family. You're very isolated. There is one person that you're feeling safe with, in contrast to feeling generally unsafe. It's going to come to a head.
Yeah, and it did. When the project ended, we got through the Christmas concert. It didn't come out unscathed, right enough. It was traumatic to some extent. But we finished the Christmas concert. The program, the tour roundup, the project ended, and then we were receiving transfer calls. So that's when you're called and you get your new assignment. And we are taught that those assignments are made by spiritual revelation, that the Lord reveals to the mission president and the assistants where it is you have to go next. And so the mission president knew that I was suffering. And by the way, I must say the other elders were suffering. One other elder in particular was really, really suffering at the time. And although I withdrew from him because I thought I can't rely on him because he's unwell too. But the mission president was aware that our mental health was not in a good way.
So what is that what a missionary is supposed to do when you feel like you're either unwell or you need some kind of help? Your mission president is your go-to person.
Yeah.
How quickly were you able to recognize it in yourself to be able to tell him?
So I didn't tell him, but it was that companion.
Right.
It was Elder Conachi that had contacted him to kind of give him an idea of what was going on when I had kind of collapsed and was unable to function.
Okay.
So he was aware of it, and the other elder had been in touch with him. But he is responsible for the well-being and safety of all missionaries in that mission. He has that responsibility. I think some missions, they have the dynamic where the mission president's wife kind of takes part responsibility for the health of the missionaries. I don't really know how it works. But ultimately, he's responsible for those hundreds of lives in that mission, depending on where the mission is. He is
so your family can kind of almost feel they're going to continue to be worried, but you have someone who's looking after you, and they have been made aware that there's this really big thing going on with you. And they're clearly going to follow up about that. They're clearly going to make sure that you get treatment, and we don't have to worry too much, right?
No, because unfortunately, again, these leaders are ill-equipped to deal with these things, and this leader was 100%, this mission president was, at the time, and in my experience, completely incapable of dealing with this level of mental ill health. And let me say,
Sorry, Ben, on you go, please.
let me say that the church really does a disservice to the leaders that it calls. They've got bishops in the crooks and crannies of the world that they could be, 26-year-old bishops that are trying to counsel marriages just based on discernment and spiritual gifts. It's diabolical. And they've got mission presidents who could be fundamentalist, Republican, COVID denying, climate change denying, and let me not get too political, but you know the type of person I'm describing, and that's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's just as harmful as well. Over destigmatized individuals as well that are responsible for these young people, and they're ill-equipped to do it. They do not know how to deal with those things, and he clearly did not have a clue how to deal with this. So at that point in time, before I was transferred to my next area to begin a regular mission again, there was no offer of treatment. I think there was a little bit of counsel from the mission president, but there was no offer of treatment. There was no extra support. There was no option to contact home to speak to them. It's just be faithful. There's good things coming. Once the project is ended and you've moved to your next area, it'll be a new start, a new beginning, and the Lord will send you somewhere that you'll be safe. And that
I can't help but feel, and obviously I don't know your mission president at the time, I can't speak to him, I can't help but feel as well within the church that there is this, not so much the church, I mean, I think it's a generational thing as well of this whole, there's no mental health, just pull your socks up, get on with it, some people don't believe in a thing as mental health. I mean, it saddens me, and that's what people always go back to, is that leader roulette, because, your mission president did the total opposite to what my mission president done. My mission president, who was amazing, got me to a GP to get that sorted, allowed me to call home at the time and on a regular basis afterwards to try to help me to steer my mission, because he knew deep down I didn't want to go home, but at the time I was like, I need to go home. So I think again, like you say, it's a mixture of the leader roulette, the lack of training, to how two mission presidents dealing with a very similar thing, because I mean, I was really severely depressed at this point. Like, I wanted to go home. I was not staying on that mission. I was nasty to my companion, but the two completely different paths in your story to my story, where I got the help I needed to, compared to you who didn't and was being basically told to just get on with it and have faith.
Also, though, I mean, it does make me wonder about the male-female dynamic, if it's more socially acceptable for you to have had mental health issues than it is for a man to have mental health issues. And just sort of putting that out there. But what I'm interested too is, there isn't this is not new. You both are not the only missionaries who've ever experienced mental health trauma, burnout, things like that on their mission. So to use the fact that we don't have enough training, or that people don't have enough experience, I mean, it's no rocket science. You know that people are going to get sick. You know that young people away from home are going to struggle, especially when you've been so supported in your ward, to find even just those types of natural challenge, the physicality of what the work that you're doing, it's waiting to happen. To sort of be blind to that is, it's almost like willful ignorance. You're choosing not to do your damn job.
Absolutely. And I work for the Scottish Ambulance Service now, and I do not have enough fingers and toes to rhyme off for you the mental health support services that we have available to our members of staff. I mean, I'm continually, as a manager, making referrals to get people the help that they need within 24 hours that work for us. And you contrast that to 18-year-old boys. And by the way, I also taught at the MTC, and I saw amazing, amazing young men and young women come through the MTC that had been signed off to serve missions, who were extremely vulnerable, whether it was their additional needs that they had, or whether it was their emotional state at the time. But in my opinion, we very irresponsibly send people, young people, on missions who are vulnerable anyway, to go into an environment where the culture can potentially become very, very toxic. I'm not saying that as a general rule of thumb, but because I don't want to speak generally, because there'll always be someone that disagrees. But to a culture that can be very, very toxic, that can be dangerous and detrimental to well-being and to life, and to not have, at least at the time, it seemed to me there was no access to mental health support services, when you've got a breeding ground for mental health complications, just by how it's fundamentally structured and set up. So in my opinion, and based on my experiences, missions, I can't speak to all of them again, but in my experience, are unsafe environments, and they can be dangerous environments in terms of people's lives and people's health. And there is a hell of a lot of work to be done in order to make missions safe. I mean, I think of my wife, Alicia, who served in the Adriatic North Mission in Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia, who, as a young female, realised in her first couple of weeks that the person whose home she was in was actually on the phone negotiating with a human trafficker a price for her, and then also who has experienced a stalker from her mission, who, in years after her mission, when he found out that she was engaged to me and not him, travelled from Serbia to Alicia's hometown in Germany, armed with the intention to cause harm. I mean, and I'm sorry. I understand that there are spiritual gifts, and I know that Scripture speaks of them, and I know that we can receive. And it's, Christ taught that He can protect us, and we can pray for protection. But God also gave us a brain, and He bloody expects us to use it as well as our spirituality. And the fact that young people are exposed to such dangerous circumstances, now obviously those are very, very specific and explicit circumstances, but just generally, the structure of missions, having to get up so early, go to bed at the exact time, having a rigid schedule, knocking doors slammed in your face, abuse shouted at you, people being spat on, sisters being threatened with horrible things. There weren't sister missionaries in Airdrie for so long because they were sexually assaulted in the 90s.
Also, I was supposed to go to Greece, obviously, initially my mission, where missionaries are regularly put in jail for proselyting. They obviously get out, but they're spending some time in jail because of the proselyting laws that the police and things enforce over there.
And I know that people's response will be to this, yeah, but it's through those difficult experiences and those trials that we grow closer to Christ. And it's like, I don't need a stalker chasing me across Europe with knives to bring me closer to Christ. Yeah, God does not orchestrate these things. He does not orchestrate the tragedies in our lives. He can be there for us and help us to overcome them, but He doesn't orchestrate the tragedies. And it's just a very, very easy cop-out when people just will not admit that missions have the potential to be fundamentally dangerous. We have, on all accounts, but specifically for me, I can speak to my experiences in terms of mental health. I was so close to being a statistic, a life lost, a missionary lost, because of the lack of training and education and psychological support and access to psychological support that I needed. Now, I got sent to Bruges by the way that we pronounce that in Flemish or in Dutch is Brugge, believe it or not. And I can't believe I just said Bruges. I'm horrified with myself. But I was sent to the city of Bruges, which was known in the mission to be notoriously difficult. It was like the refiner's fire area. That's where you're sent to really grow close to the Saviour, because it's such a horrible area to serve in. The branch is so small, blah, 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 blah. And so I was clearly sent there. They, in my opinion, the assistants to the presidents who had an issue with me at the time had perhaps made that suggestion. Now I'm speculating. I know it's by inspiration, but I truly believe that I was sent there to try and circumvent me and to teach me a lesson. I remember, I really believe that that's why I was sent to Bruges. They were like, "Oh, you've had it so easy," even though I didn't. So we're now going to send you to Bruges. We're going to put you right into the refiner's fire. And it was the worst decision and the most uninspired decision that anyone has made that's influenced my life. It was the worst decision possible for me, because it, as I say, it almost led to me losing my life due to the seriousness of my depression, the seriousness of my mood swings, and the isolation and the loneliness and the feelings of self-hate and shame and disgust and the exhaustion, the lack of motivation, the apathy, not even able to get out of bed in the morning, wanting to absolutely do my companion's panning, because, I mean, bless his heart, but I just shouldn't have been put with someone like that, you know, based on what I was going through. So I was sent to Bruges. I'll give you this in a bite size. That wasn't working out. So I was sent to the now former assistant to the president that I didn't like. So I was sent to Brussels, the one that had kind of been gossiping about me behind my back, had even spread a rumour that I might possibly be gay. A very immature rumour to spread in the mission at the time. But I was sent to be under his careful watch in Brussels in a new area that he had just opened, and then that obviously didn't work out. So I was sent to be with another elder in Maastricht in the Netherlands, who was also suffering from serious mental health. And it was the opinion of the mission president that if we were together, we might be able to just lift one another up and be able to relate to one another. So that just illustrates just how completely uneducated, uninformed, risky and irresponsible these decisions were.
Is he having regular discussions with you, the mission president?
At this point, there were regular discussions with him. He had authorised at this point more communication with home. So I told my mum that I was really struggling. I was in contact with my mum and dad a lot. I had been sent to an American psychiatrist in France that the church knew, and had been given a bipolar 2 diagnosis at the time. After speaking with him for a long time, was put on a medication and then just sent back to the city. So there was no kind of, and that actually, I mean, we've been going a long time, but you could probably do a part 2. But where it gets extremely concerning and frightening for me is that, from my perspective, my mission president was doing all he could to stop me from going home early. In fact, he actually told me in an interview that he had with me that he had, at his mission president training with general authorities, he promised a prominent leader in the church that he would not let anyone go home early. He would do all he could to keep them on the mission. Now, that's just obviously impractical and illogical. That's not going to happen. But one of the most traumatic meetings that I had with this mission president is I told him that I felt I had to go home. I told him I feel very unwell. I feel very depressed, and I feel like I want to harm myself, and I don't want to be here anymore. I need to go home. I can't be here anymore. And his response was, in fewer words, "Well, Elder Hunter," you know that voice that they do, "the Lord has spoken to me, and it's not time for you to go home yet." You know, he felt, because of the position that he was in, that he could dictate to me when I could go home or not, and that the revelation was coming to him and that he was calling the shots. And so instead, I was sent to the office. So I had literally done another whistle stop tour of the countries, sent to the office, because in the office I wouldn't have to knock doors. So they obviously thought that was just a problem. If he doesn't need to knock doors, it'll be magically better overnight, which obviously wasn't the case. These were deep-rooted, psychological issues and chemical issues that were going on with me that needed treatment, not just medication and one consultation with a psychiatrist. And so I was sent to the office, and eventually, oh, and by the way, another thing, the communication between my mum and dad and the mission president was diabolical. He was not communicating, giving them updates. And my communication with them was limited and also tainted by my illness. I wasn't giving them a true reflection of what was going on and what my experience was. And they knew that. They knew that I was far more unwell than I was able to communicate to them. And so you would like to think that they were relying on him. Now, he hadn't even contacted them to begin with. They had to initiate that contact and force that contact to happen. And my mum and dad were feeling frustrated that he wasn't entirely open and honest with them and that he wasn't listening to them. And in fact, this mission president on a phone call with my dad actually chastised my dad, who just wanted to keep his son alive and was desperate, hundreds of miles away, barely able to communicate with me, worried that I'm so extremely unwell. This mission president chastised my dad on the phone and told him that the way he spoke to a priesthood leader was inappropriate and was not within the spirit of the work. And all my dad was trying to do was to keep me alive. So moving on, I moved to the office. I just want to go home. I just want my mum. I just want my mum. That's all I wanted.
From the other side of that, I think it's worth mentioning that so your family are very, very private. They don't tend to they wear their hearts on their sleeves. They are there for everyone, but they would never dream of talking about your personal business or Alana's. They are very protective of your own privacy and things like that. So I had this sense, you would have been the same, but dialed right up, that your parents are extremely distressed, that your mum is really, really upset and just wants to come get you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, do you want to say how you were feeling?
I just, obviously, your mum is very private, and even me as a family member at that moment, I didn't know the full story of what was going on, because at that moment in time, Tracy didn't have the headspace or the time to be telling everyone everything. Her main concern at that time was Ben and getting Ben home. But we were also worried because, knowing my sister, she would have been on a plane and she would have went and got him, and it was such a horrible time to watch, to see my sister in such a state, to hear of my nephew who was struggling, and again, because of a man who feels he's in power and thinks he knows what's best for someone who we just wanted home to keep safe. It was one of the most horrible times, having to watch that from the backdrop, not even knowing the full picture. I knew there was so much more going on, but I understood why your mum held back on it, because she didn't need all that going on, everyone knowing everything. We knew Ben was really unwell. We knew he needed to be home, and we knew he wasn't getting to come home. And that was so hard at that time. It was such a hard time for all of our family. And it's not at all to make it about us, because it was about Ben at that moment. But it was a very difficult time for all of us. It really was.
And so we, as the people who are back home, who have Ben's best interests at heart, I think it was really, really clear that this is the stalwart family in the ward. This is these are the people you can rely on. There's, this isn't sort of some sort of lack of faithfulness on the part of your parents or some kind of undermining of the priesthood. This was genuine distress that you were not being looked after. And I think what you say is absolutely right. We want to make sure that your journey is done justice to. So what I'd like to do, if we could maybe we'll make sure that we talk about everything from this side of things, but you don't leave the church after your mission. You don't you continue to go on and be doing incredible things, and you come back and you are practically the savior of the ward, the next great hope for the ward. I think if our stake president, I would imagine, this is based on not very much at all, but I think if our stake president had a wish, it would be for people like you to come back. It's with people like you and Alicia that are sort of, you're still the hope of the ward, whether you're there or not, whether you identify as Mormon or not. That's what people who are still in the church wish would be different, pray would be different. And so we want to talk about how you can go from feeling suicidal on your mission, getting your head around being on new medication in the first place. Just even if you're not serving a mission, that's a huge undertaking. And so I want to keep talking about your mission just now, and then if it's okay, we'd love to get you back for a part 2 where we talk about what happens afterwards, because this is by no means the end of the story. So you're talking with your mission president, you are making it, he cannot be misunderstanding how ill you are. Your parents certainly understand how ill you are. What happens next?
Eventually, the process was started for me to return home, and as far as I'm concerned, still to this day, now again, there's always multiple sides to one story, but as far as I'm concerned, the mission president was either dishonest or uneducated on the process of leaving home early, for that kind of reason.
Of leaving your mission early.
Yeah,
Can I just draw your attention just to this comment? Were you able to retain possession of your passport?
Yeah, we had our passports with us all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we had our passports with us all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had been moved to the office. Things were getting really, really bad. I had demanded essentially to go home. I told him that there was no question about it, but then he managed to delay the process for as long as he could. He completely rinsed it because he clearly was adamant that I should not be going home for whatever reason. So I started to really resent him. I was aware of numerous other people in the mission who were mentally unwell and were having a similar experience. So I spoke to one of those missionaries on the phone because I was close to him. We spoke about his experience, and I did not hold back about my feelings about the mission president. Unfortunately, someone else in the apartment that night heard that conversation and reported it to the mission president. So I also then was receiving chastisement from the mission president for disrespecting priesthood leaders and not sustaining them, even though the way he was dealing with this was just pathetic for everyone that I was speaking to in the mission that was suffering from mental ill health. And in fact, as far as I know, actually, after I left, another missionary in the mission was suffering so badly, and the mission president was not allowing them to go home, that their mother flew from America and drove to her apartment and picked her up and took her home and told the mission president once she was home. So, other people were having an experience, is what I've been led to believe. I cannot confirm that story is true necessarily, but that's what I was told. And so I'm in the office. I've demanded to go home, but I knew he was delaying the process as best as he could. He had me go and spend the day with a stake president out there that I was close to, that I love and respect. But I think the mission president thought he would be influential in helping me be convinced to fight through it and overcome it. And it didn't work. I was so broken. I needed to go home. I was completely done in, completely unwell, and just at the absolute pits of depression and anxiety.
Did you feel that at that time for him, that it was more about him keeping his promise to the fact that he'd said that he would make sure that no one went home early? Or do you think it was more than that?
I don't know why he was so adamant that I would stay on my mission. Maybe he just really believed that he had received revelation that it wasn't time for me to go. I don't know, but he definitely didn't.
I think this is the time to bring in the phrase that we haven't used through this whole podcast, and even in preparing for it. But we have an issue, especially most recently the church in Scotland, and the United Kingdom and Ireland. We have an issue with recognizing forms of abuse when we see it.
Mhm.
And it's understandable. It happens throughout so much of life. But to call this what it is, ecclesiastical abuse, someone has authority to make decisions or influence your life, and they use their spiritual authority to do that, to wield some kind of power over you.
Well, make no mistake, if there's anyone listening to this podcast that is not a member of the church, this whole time they're probably thinking, why did you not just get on a plane and go home?
Right.
Why would you not just go? You can do that. Well, actually, yeah, in practical terms, I could have just done that. But, and obviously this may come up in more so in part 2 if we have it, but I personally believe by social science definition that the Mormon church is cultish. And I believe that I was very, very programmed in how I thought. And in as much as I was unwell and needed to go home and knew I needed to go home, and in as much as I resented my mission president, I still wanted to do things right. I still wanted an honourable release. I was still proving myself to the Lord this whole time, because again, if I didn't, then maybe I'm ruining people's chances at eternal happiness, including my own and my family's. So
I think as well, you should remember as well that it's not just as simple as booking a flight, because cost comes into it, and as a missionary, you're very limited on what money you have. You're given basically a budget to live off each week or each month. And it also comes into, if you're not from a wealthy family. Now, I don't know how much a flight costs from where you were to come home, but that's just another example of what might come into it for other missionaries. It's financially, you don't have huge amounts of money as a missionary there, so it's not just as black and white as just book a flight and go home.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. It is ecclesiastical abuse, and obviously I've made my feelings clear about this man, this mission president. I don't beat around the bush in terms of that. It was abusive, but I feel it would be unfair of me not to say that again, that he hadn't been adequately trained, he hadn't been adequately equipped. He had been set up by failure by the institution. It's how things are set up. It's the root of the problem that has to be solved.
Yep.
And it's not going to be solved until the root of it is solved and people accept that missions are fundamentally dangerous and unhealthy. And so I have got to say that he was a soft-spoken man. He was gentle. He was, thoughtful. Obviously, I racked my brain trying to find positive things about him, because I have, and that's a whole other story, by the way, is my process of forgiveness. But it is ecclesiastical abuse, whether or not he was aware of it, and he is accountable for that abuse, no matter whether he's aware of it or not.
And so, where there is abuse, there is the trauma that you live with. So, could we maybe then move on to how the hell did you get away?
So my mum really lost her patience. Essentially, the dishonesty that I feel existed was that the mission president told me that I was not able to go home until I'd spoken to my stake president at home. I had to have a conversation with him, and I think he was traveling at the time, or I don't know why we couldn't get a hold of him. The mission president may not have even tried to contact him. I don't know. It was in his nature. But eventually, when I did speak to that stake president, it had been drawn out for about 5 weeks at this point. Eventually, when I spoke to the stake president at home, I said to him, I need to come home. There's no two ways about it. But I was told I had to speak to you before that could happen. It was like, that's not true. That isn't true. You don't need to speak to me before you can be released, medical release, to come home. And so that's where I feel the dishonesty comes from, or just a lack of knowledge on what the due process is. Either way, it was messy, irresponsible, and it was someone that was extremely unwell you were dealing with, so you should have known your stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I think actually my mum threatened to contact the police and report me as kidnapped. That's how serious it got. My mum threatened the mission president and told him, if you do not get my son home, I will report you to the local police as having kidnapped him. And I won't get into that, in my opinion, on that, because it's a strong accusation, but it was just a threat from my mum. And within an hour, I had an itinerary in my inbox. It was as easy as that. And I flew home, got home, was back with my family, and it was a bit of a blur that day, but after I had seen the family at the airport, we all went back to my mum's, I'm sure. And I was on the buzz of the day of seeing everybody again. And I think eventually everyone slowly left, and it was just my mum and dad, and maybe my brothers had gone to bed, I'm not sure. But I remember after everyone had left, and I had, waved goodbye and we closed the door, I remember just collapsing and just lying on the living room floor, because since I came back, I was just speaking to everyone the whole time and with the family. So I'm sure I collapsed and just lay on the floor in the hallway, and I think I just cried. I have a memory of that. My mum would be able to tell me whether or not that's exactly how it happened. But it all came out at that point. So that's eventually how I got home, was my mum threatening.
When you're saying about, maybe for some people thinking, right, that's a bit harsh or a bit extent to your mother suggesting that you were kidnapped. But, as a mother myself, you would do anything to protect your children. It's a mother's plea. Like, I don't see any other way here. We've tried doing it the correct way. We've been through the proper channels. We're trying to communicate. And this guy, in my opinion, was holding you against your will. And that's how I viewed it, because you had made it very clear as an adult. Yeah, some people might see you as a child, but you were an adult by age, and you were telling him, I want to go home. It should have been done as quickly as it was done when your mum made that threat. And him and all his powers did nothing. And, I agree with you. I do believe there's been lies told. I do believe that, and I think there's a chain of command within the church. So I guess I'm pushing back a little bit, and you're saying, that he maybe just didn't know. But I'm sorry, if you don't know something or the process of something, he has a chain of command, so to speak, where he can then go to the next level and find out what the process is for that. Mm-hmm. So he blatantly was trying to keep you there against your will. And that's how I viewed it at the time. You might have different views, other people might have different views, but as a mother, I would do the very same thing to protect my child and to get them the help they need. So
And again, my opinion now is completely different. If you are a 20-year-old adult, you should not give two shits about what another adult says, whether they're a priesthood leader or not. You do what's best for you. If you go home, you tell them you're going home. If you're on your mission and you're unwell, you speak in no uncertain terms and you tell them what you need, and it should be done for you because you're an adult. You are not being held hostage. You should not be held against your will. And again, this is where the cultish nature of the church, in my opinion, comes in. I shouldn't have to request to go home. If I want to go home, I'm going to tell you that I'm going home, and you book me a flight and you send me home. It's as simple as that.
Now, one interesting thing, and it'll be really interesting if you have a different view on this, but from the outside looking in, your family, unlike what could happen in many church families, your family were just like Ben's coming home. There wasn't any judgment. There wasn't any taboo around it.
Normal homecoming, banners at the airport, everything.
Yeah. Absolutely. They had been with you there, and
so just a flashback.
I know. I'm like, oh. I was thinking that too. I kept showing Ronan the video of you coming home over and over again, and your mum just wouldn't stop hugging you. It was there we go. But again, this is my impression, and I do live in Clouds Cuckoo Land a lot of the time. The ward seemed to just have no question about it either. It was just like, you know, Ben's home, and there didn't seem to be a taboo around it.
No, the ward were great. The ward were fantastic. No shame at all. But actually, since we spoke, I do remember feeling, so when missionaries come home, they need to report to the High Council. Some completely useless meeting that missionaries, they have to report to them for some strange reason. And I do remember in that I felt uncomfortable. I felt a lack of compassion, just even in their faces. I felt awkward, you know, people thinking, oh, he should be home early. They didn't really know why I was home early. So, you know, they're obviously making their judgments. So actually, I didn't think about that when we were planning the podcast. But I do remember thinking that meeting was completely useless and a complete waste of time, and left me feeling a little ashamed of coming home when I met with the High Council.
And so you got to speak in the ward about having come home, right?
Yeah, I didn't speak in detail. I just said that I came home due to medical reasons. Yeah.
And what was quite interesting to me that I just feel really sort of selfish about, I guess, is that you brought home you brought home your music along with you. You know, you brought home 100% you, and while you're healing and while you're recovering from all of that, while most people don't know that you've got anything especially to recover from, I remember you brought back a song which I was really ill at the time whenever you had come home, and it impacted me so much that I remember just having this huge, powerful emotional reaction to it. And I felt like that song that you sung that day in the weeks coming home from your mission was literally one of the things that would go on and save my life. And I'm really, really thankful for your talents, Ben. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything I'd like to talk about you deconstructing and recovering from your mission before we leave it there? And yeah, I do want to talk about forgiveness, but let's talk about healing and recovery first. Let's talk about recovery.
So to be perfectly honest, I didn't really speak openly to my family about my suffering. I think when I came home, I took a very holistic approach at trying to recover and improve. I ended up that summer, I came home in the January and ended up that summer in Nauvoo again, when I probably wasn't entirely well enough to be in Nauvoo. I was in America doing the pageant for 3 months. But the person that was instrumental in my healing was a lady called Alexandra Mackenzie Johns. And Alex, I would say, is still one of my greatest friends, one of my best friends. She lives in Jordan just now. She's about to move to Utah. She's got a job at BYU, which is fantastic. But Alex was the original director that cast me in the first British pageant that I did. And when I came home from my mission, I had appendicitis and had to get surgery, so my appendix got taken out. But then I went to Jersey Channel Islands, where Alex lived, and they didn't know anything about why I came home, just that I was released medically. And I opened up to them, and I was in their home, and for about 3 nights we spoke about it every night. And Alex just told me everything I needed to hear at the time. She was able to get me in touch with what's called the in-field representative, the IFR. So that the structure of missions is that there's like one representative in Europe, or maybe 2, that cover a number of missions, and that's a mission president's middleman to general authorities. That was a structure at the time. So I was able to raise my concerns with them. I was able to raise my concerns with Stephen Allen, who was the managing director of the missionary department at the time. So she was able to get me in touch with people where I could raise my valid concerns over the safety of missions and share my experience, although it seems that nothing really came out of that, and I didn't get great responses from either of them. In the meetings, I was just told that it was kind of sent to try me. But yeah, I understand that the British pageant was very much absolutely was not Stephen Kerr's baby. 100% absolutely not. I am not personally a fan of Stephen Kerr politically, so I'm not commenting on him in that regard. I respect the work that he did at the British pageant. He was the pageant president, which is an ecclesiastical leader, but it was not his baby. It was in every way Alex Mackenzie-John's baby, in every way. It was her vision. She did Nauvoo from the early 2000s. It was her vision to bring it. And yeah, Stephen Kerr may have been instrumental in bringing it over to the UK, but it was not his. Absolutely not. 100% not.
And we'll talk a little bit more about pageanty type things, because I have questions about pageants, how they work, and sort of
and a lot of the healing came through being in Nauvoo that summer and being around people that I loved, and peer support. I think it non-clinically is one of the best things that we can have in terms of treatment. Is just peer support, having people around us that love us, that cheer us on.
Yeah, and the experience is certainly seeing Alana's, time in performing in the pageants, the pageant and the World War I commemoration. We will come back and talk about those things and your continuing career. I guess what I'm wondering about is, have you met Alicia by this time? Have you?
No, so Alicia and I didn't meet until 2018, and I was home in 2016.
Right, so we'll hold on to that for the moment then, and we'll talk about Alicia more in part 2, appropriately. Of course, we'll not talk about Alicia. We will, because Alicia's her own person, and if Alicia wants to tell her story, she will. But how does normal life look for you after a mission then, with a new diagnosis? What the hell is your life supposed to look like now? How do you just settle back to normality? Is there a normality?
No, I've never really had a very normal life. I don't like normality. I feel that my scenery should never stay the same. And so I got involved in the pageant that summer very, very quickly. I actually moved back to the Netherlands for a few weeks to work. Oh yeah, we get married in 2018, but we met.
Yeah, we can't Alicia's yes, thank you for that, Alicia. They actually met in 2017. Just fact checking for us there and keeping Ben right.
So yeah, no, I didn't hang about in Scotland. After the Nauvoo pageant, I was here for a little while, but then the British pageant was coming back to the UK, and I started to. I was assistant director for the British pageant in 2017, so started touring the UK and Ireland, holding auditions for that. So I kept very busy, and I tried to just heal through.
You kept very busy and upset your auntie all the while, because I was raging at him because he kept leaving.
Yes,
and then I had quite a close, good relationship, and I was just like, why do you keep leaving? Stop leaving.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of my healing experiences came through peer support, conversations with supportive people, and I did meet with a private therapist for a number of sessions over in America.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that you are, because let's face it, with mental health, there is no a pill or a therapy that's going to make everything suddenly fixed and better. So thank you for sharing what your journey continues to look like as you continue to heal. You mentioned forgiveness earlier on, and I want to hear your thoughts about forgiveness in terms of the abuse that you experienced.
It's a difficult one. That's probably what I would say is the most difficult topic of all of it, because I really, really didn't want to forgive the mission president, but I realised very, very quickly I wasn't forgiving him for his sake. I was forgiving him for my sake. It was a gift to myself, so that I could just move on and just be able to not continue to just resent and to hold a grudge. That was extremely important to me, that I was able to move on. And so a lot of that was advice and help and support from Alex, again, supportive conversations with her and some other friends around me, but Alex had had her own experiences of forgiving some really difficult things that had happened to her. And she was really able to teach me and guide me in how to forgive those situations. And I'm able to forgive without feeling affectionate towards someone, and I'm able to forgive without excusing their wrongdoings and without excusing the abuse. It's just forgiveness that sets me free, that allows me to just move on from it. And it was mainly through supportive conversations and declaring my forgiveness internally about 100 times a day and just continuing to remind myself that I have forgiven. And the first and second and third day, eventually you declare it a little less, and then you feel whole again.
Yeah, I think we're having a mic issue. There's a really great question that's come through that I want to comment about forgiveness first. That I think when it comes to any matter of abuse, we need to jump steps in the church, and forgiveness. We are told explicitly that we are accountable if we don't forgive, and it puts all of this onus on someone who's been abused to get to some kind of stage that it just might never happen in this life. It might not be right for them. Maybe it will, but that doesn't have to be part of their journey. And I think it's great that you have a healthy way to look at what forgiveness looks like for you. This really great question, though, I think plays exactly into that. So our friend Paul is asking, with what you know and experience, what would you tell prospective missionaries?
I considered this question, probably the last time I considered it is when I was still active in the church. And I disagree with that answer that I had back then. So I've never actually considered that question since I left the Mormon church. With what I know and what I've experienced, what would I tell prospective missionaries? I would tell them to probably deeply, deeply search their soul and decide if serving a mission is something they truly desire to do for themselves. Do not serve a mission to please anyone, including yourself. Serve a mission because it's something that you want to do, and if you feel it's something that will help you forge your spiritual path and help to forge your life path, then absolutely go for it. Because in as much as I had a horrible experience on my mission, and we've been speaking about that for a long time, if you remember at the beginning, I did say that some of the richest experiences and most beautiful sacred experiences I've ever had were on my Mormon mission. And so it's a very difficult place to be in, because I see the benefits of mission, but I also see the dangers, and those dangers are unique to people, individuals, personal vulnerabilities. And so I would just remind prospective missionaries that it's so opposite to the advice you're given in the MTC. You're literally shown a talk by David A. Bednar numerous times, if you want, in the MTC about the character of Christ and getting over yourself.
What people might want to see that talk more than once.
Yeah, they show it over and over and over again.
Okay.
For you to go see it, and it's about overcoming yourself and not caring about yourself, and not caring about yourself, but not putting others before you. He speaks about a woman who receives a call to say that her daughter and her friends have been in a car accident, and then she's trying to sort things out and speaking to the hospital and speaking to other families. She finds out that her daughter has actually died whilst on the phone call, but then she continues to help out the other, mothers and fathers of the children that were in the car accident. And then eventually, the day of the funeral, she's a Relief Society president, this mother, the same mother, and this woman comes really unhappy because her family are ill and she hasn't organised for people to organise a meal for them. So the morning of her daughter's funeral, she arranges a meal and takes it over and everything. So, you know, you're taught to not, you know, forget yourself. My advice would be put yourself first. You are no use to anyone on your mission when you're trying to do good if you have not taken care of your own mental well-being. I still see that missions can serve a purpose, although I don't agree with necessarily trying to convert people to the church just because of my feelings towards the church. But I see missions being beneficial to both missionaries and the lives that can be touched by missionaries, because missionaries can be incredibly inspired and do incredibly inspired things, and they can change people's lives, just as the people I met on my mission changed mine. But you have to put yourself first. You cannot allow someone to abuse you to the point that you believe that their words trumps yours, that if the Lord has spoken to them and said that, you know, for example, you aren't going home, that's true. You need to make decisions for yourself. You're still an adult. Your mission president does not dictate to you what you can and cannot do. Of course, there are rules, but when it comes to you prioritizing your health, keeping yourself safe and keeping yourself alive, you absolutely put yourself first. If you cannot get out of bed and you need to unwind and relax and decompress, you do that. When you get to the pearly gates, Jesus isn't going to say, oh, you know, that time when you were feeling suicidal and you stayed in bed and you didn't get up and still knock doors when you really should have, that's why you're not getting into heaven. That's just preposterous. And that isn't the character of Christ, Mr. Bednar. And so that's my advice to missionaries, is you are no use to anyone if you do not put yourself, if you do not prioritize your well-being and your health, and stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself and stand up for what you believe is right. No one can ever fault you for that.
So in the event, we know that serving missionaries do get to have a little podcast listen every now and again when they can. We do know that some of you guys get to check in. If you are a serving missionary and you're struggling, advocate for yourself where you can. Where you can't, speak up, talk about it, let people know that you need help. And in the event that you're in crisis and that you can't find help, then we would invite you, please do reach out. Please do feel free to get in touch and we will make sure that you get help.
Yeah, and also, if you're a missionary in the UK, just because you're in this kind of mission bubble, doesn't mean that you can't access services like Samaritans if you feel you need it. And whatever the local services that may be available in whatever country you are, the first thing is, as Jane is saying, is just reaching out, just telling someone. If you don't know what to say, all you need to say is, I just need help, or I need someone to talk to, or I don't know what's wrong, but I just need someone or something. And access your local services, because as far as I can tell, there still aren't great resources available via the church and via your mission president, at least not even near as adequate as they should be. So just speak to whoever you can if you trust them and you feel that they can help you. Do not suffer alone. You do not have to.
We have questions about, you know, about what your life is looking like next. We are going to talk about your right nows and what happened after you came back from the mission, because you were still active. You were still intending to raise a family in the church, right?
Yeah, I was all in.
Absolutely. So we're going to come back for a part 2 when we can set that up with Ben. We are talking about abuse a lot this past few weeks and past few months, because we have to. There is a story playing out just now in so many homes, in so many wards, in so many churches. And we have watched how our church community in the United Kingdom has become extremely polarized and has struggled with recognising what abuse looks like, has struggled with offering adequate abuse and support to people who come forward having experienced abuse, and to feel that the church is doing all it can, or for people who feel like the church is should be doing a lot more. We have so many things to say about this that we are inviting people to share their own stories so that we can make a broader point about recognizing abuse, so that you can, when you see it, you can name that thing. We have got a lot coming up over the next few weeks, and to continue to talk about Ben's story is going to be part of that. We're also going to be speaking with Sam Young. We're going to be speaking with an incredible survivor called Katie, who's going to be, I think, is our next episode. We're going to have the next installment of Dana Kimball's story. We are going to be speaking with organisations and agencies who support people who are recovering from abuse, all in the help that we can have a healthier conversation here in the church. I find it really interesting that Ben is able to frame incredibly powerful spiritual experiences and yet talk about ecclesiastical abuse. It happened, and when we shine sunlight on cases of abuse, you know the saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. When we start talking about it, it might be the best disinfectant, but also somewhere along the line there has to be accountability. And I find it incredible that Ben has tried to use his platform and his voice to talk about problems with missions, to talk about how this is a breeding ground for you know, mental health problems and this type of burnout. It's not new, and it's still not being dealt with adequately. There is no training for companions to recognise how to keep someone mentally and physically safe. We have mission presidents who can go rogue and exercise unrighteous dominion or abuse someone purely by use of their power. I'm going to come to Ben for some closing thoughts, but first of all, I'm going to come to you, Alana. You also, you've survived various types of abuse. Is there anything that you'd like to share just as we close out? I'm sorry, I know you hate it when I do this.
I hate getting put in the spot. Well, not regarding abuse, I apologise for my so much movement tonight. Like I'm having some back issues just now, so hence the stand and the sitting, the movement constantly, because I know it can be a bit distracting at times. I mean, I guess my going along with what Ben said, you know, obviously my abuse wasn't necessarily within the walls of the church abuse, but you know, it was still abuse. Is like Ben says, you know, just use the resources available to you. And like you say, I mean, I really feel I'm just going to reiterate a lot what you said, you know, like definitely advocate for yourself and just realise, I guess something that I learned, and I know it's different for everyone. I'm not saying this is how it should be, because it's different, because I waited for a long time. I think if I could give anyone any advice, it's sometimes, and I do believe there is a timing to an extent, but I went through a life of saying, it's not the right time for me to deal with it. It's not the right time for me to deal with it. It's not the right time for me to deal with it. But I got to the point that I realised that the time was never going to be right. And this is just from my personal experience. I'm not saying this is right from everyone. It got to the point that I realised the time will never be right for me to deal with this. And I think it was just that fear. And I think that's what happens with all of us. It's that fear of digging up all those old emotions, all that pain. But for me, the only way I've been able to move forward in my life is from dealing with that. I do also understand that there are people that can move forward in life without necessarily dealing with it. I was not one of those people. But I just think, especially from the church point of view, it pains me to think that within the walls of the church, when you grow up within the church, that this you believe is supposed to be a safe place, a safe haven where you find Christ. Now, I'm not saying that Christ isn't there, but I've now realised in my adult years that it's not a safe space. Sorry, here we go. It's very, very much the opposite, in my opinion, which is the reason why I walked for my daughter, because it's not a safe space for my daughter to be in. So I think if your journey is to continue within the walls of the church, absolutely support that if that's what you need in your life. But be the change. Advocate for those who don't have a voice, for our children, for our missionaries who are out there, you know, suffering. It's all I'm hearing and reading about lately is missionaries who are on their mission and having faith crises and struggling. And I think it's just important to make sure that we do all we can and not allow the system or the, what was it you said, the power, the ecclesiastical, whatever,
the authority.
To get in the way. I apologise, usual. Just even, I guess that what I'm trying to say is don't allow them to shut you down. It's something that I did for a long, long time. I allowed myself to be silenced. If I still was within the walls of the church right now, I think things would look very different, because I think I would be advocating more. I'm still trying to do certain things as an outsider, if that's probably what they'll call me. But yeah, if you need to be within the wall, yeah, and you can do so much even out with the church, it's just try and be that voice, be that change, because someone has to do it. You know, I'm aware of what the consequences could be of me trying to change things, trying to speak up, and I'm ready to accept that if that's what it takes. Because I need the church to be a safe space for people, even if I don't believe anymore. It's about protecting people from the system of abuse that happens within the walls of the church, whether they like to believe it does or it doesn't, but it does, it absolutely does. So yeah, I think that's probably somewhat what's in my mind.
Ben,
Apologies for this.
I'd like you to share some closing thoughts and maybe let our audience know what you'll be speaking about next time. What kinds of things are we going to cover?
Yeah, so next time I'll be speaking about why I have chosen to leave the church, why I've resigned my membership from the church, why it's the best decision I could have made for myself. You know, I saw a question up there that was food for thought for me from Aggie, who said, do you still believe in the teachings of the church? Absolutely not. I believe in the teachings of Christ, and I believe they are not appropriately taught in the church. And so, yes, I have left the church, and my experience of self-discovery, as well as researching and discovering the history of the church as accurately as I'm able to, as well as my learning about systemic abuse within the church. I mean sexual abuse, I mean racial abuse, ecclesiastical abuse, and specifically the efforts of the church to silence survivors and to expose survivors and to pay off families, you know, has facilitated in me this kind of unexpected reformation of my faith. And so I describe myself as a free-thinking Christian. No one dictates how I practice my faith to me, and no one puts God in a box for me anymore. I worship God as I understand the teachings of Christ and as they apply to me on a day-to-day basis, and it's mainly through music at the minute, and through my experiences and relationships with others that I worship and see and feel and give thanks to God. And I am very, very glad to no longer be a member of the church, and it has been an incredibly liberating experience. But in terms of what we've spoken about today, just very, very briefly, I personally do not feel a sense of responsibility to try and fix or even assist people in the church. What I mean by that is I don't actively seek to help them in the same way that Jane and my Aunt Alana clearly do. But I was happy to do this podcast because people in the church don't want to speak about this stuff. And people do not want to highlight this stuff because they're fearful that it makes them unworthy and that it makes them less spiritual and that it makes them disrespectful of priesthood leaders. I couldn't give a crap about those things anymore because I'm not a member of the church. But I'm very, very acutely aware that there are people that could be listening, and even Jane, you're saying there could be missionaries listening that are experiencing these exact things. And so if that is happening to you, if you can find the strength within you, take ownership of your own life, take ownership of your own choices, and remember that there is no dictator in your spiritual journey and in your spiritual faith. You tell your mission president what you need, and you work with him and come to an agreement. And if he is not going to work with you and he is not supporting you, you find someone else that is going to advocate for you and that is going to fight your corner. That is what I would say. You aren't alone. People have been through it. People don't want to talk about it, but it's happening. And members of the church can deny it as much as they like. They can give it as many different slants as they like. They can sugarcoat it as much as they like. But systemic abuse is rife in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is rife, and we will only be able to heal from it when we start talking about it. And that's why I wanted to do this, is just to help anyone that may be in that situation. So I'm not necessarily saying my inbox is open. I don't think it is. So I would rather you didn't, because I'm sure there are loads of other people that can help you. I wouldn't ignore you, but what I'm saying is I've done this podcast so that you know it's okay to suffer. It's okay to be in that place, but it's not okay to stay there, because there can be help and there can be a hand that can reach out and rescue you. So ask for help, find someone that will advocate for you, and do not let anyone tell you whether or not you're allowed to go home, whether or not you're allowed to call home, whether or not you're allowed to visit home. You do what you need to do to take care of yourself. You are more important than someone else's claim to spiritual intelligence, and therefore their decisions for you on behalf of you based on that.
Look at those healthy boundaries being set. That was so impressive. I love it.
You just made me remember there when you're talking about limiting the calls home. Obviously, I understand now missionaries are getting to call home on a more regular basis. But again, it just goes back to the things that, again, they create these obstacles themselves. Because I look back to when I was on my mission, after mission president said, okay, it's time to stop calling home, I didn't, because I'd got so used to it. So I was buying those little, calling cards that you can buy where you type a code in and it doesn't show up because you're using the calling card. And I still continued to call home for a long time. So I ended up then being deceitful, And so obviously now I think that they're making little changes that are helpful, but there's so much further that they need to go in respect to missions and the abusive practices. And as you say, Ben, the unhealthiness, because I wish they did have that on my mission. I hate that, on my mission. I hate that. Sorry for saying that. I hate it. But do you know what I mean? It's like things like that are so needed to help with mental health and things, because that was one of the most horrific experiences in my life. As much as I enjoyed my mission, I've done it again. The mission was being. I felt like I was ripped away from my family. I'd never been away from my family. I was allowed no contact apart from through email. And I was only allowed to call home on Mother's Day and Christmas. And think, it's crazy. Anyway, we'll be here all night if I start talking. So let's.
No, listen, people, start talking. If your mission experience was problematic, if you experienced mental health issues, if you experienced ecclesiastical abuse on your mission or in your ward or in wherever the hell you find it, by your home teachers, by your husband, by your Relief Society president, by the person that's been assigned to you to look at. If someone is abusing their power over you, then you speak up, because do you know what? It is rife in the church. The interesting thing is that absolutely abuse happens in all areas of our society. We know this. But we are speaking about abuse that plays out in uniquely Mormon ways. And, you know, as Ben pointed out, your choice to serve a Mormon mission is sending you into a set of circumstances where it is a breeding ground for these types of things to happen. Missions, I suppose it's something to maybe just think about for next time, because we're going to wrap up here. But I mean, is there a healthy way that a Mormon mission could look? Even when Ben's is expressed through music, even when Ben's is able to use his own talents, just the sheer volume of work, the pressure from home, the illness, the negotiating the different personalities, the isolation, all of those things create this perfect storm of illness, of mental unwellness, of physical unwellness. And then when you're not being listened to, then when you find people become roadblocks to you being able to recover, and do it by throwing Jesus under the bus because God has revealed it to them. How dare you? How dare you do that? We normally wait until we're kind of wrapping up someone's experience of their journey before we would properly bless it. But you know, because, you know, Ben, you've been so open and so vulnerable and modeled really healthy recovery strategies and demonstrated how you can set healthy boundaries. I'm just so appreciative of that as people who have shared your Mormon background, as someone who's shared your family story, and as people who just love you and love your family, on behalf of Alana and I, we want to bless every moment of your journey. We want to bless you as a father. We want to bless you as a husband. We want to bless you as you in your own right, who exists to, you know, just live a happy life and to be a happy, whole, complete person without needing to have something else to get you, to make you worthy. We bless your voice talents. We bless your mental health. We bless you to feel loved and to be able to know that you have so much love and support around you, that we are part of your journey and that we are part of your story. And when you need held up, we are there and commit to be there to do that. We bless you to find Christ in your life in whichever way you do that. We love you so much, Ben. Okay, we're going to wrap up, and we'll just, you know what, we'll just let you all know when we'll be back again. It will be next Wednesday. We can tell you that. And yeah, we should be back with Dana next week, and we'll keep you all posted. But we will have a part 2 with Ben because he's pinky promised us, right? Y'all be good. Y'all have a great night, and we'll see you during the next episode.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.